Before we begin tonight's quiet journey into forgotten history, if my voice brings you even a little peace, you're welcome to subscribe. It helps me keep making these slow, gentle stories for you. Close your eyes and let the static of the modern worlds simply fade away. Tonight, we are not going anywhere fast. Instead, we are drifting back, past the noise of engines, past the glow of city lights, into the deep, velvet silence of the ancient world. Imagine sitting by a dying fire under a sky crowded with stars, listening to the very first stories of us. Let's walk through 5,000 years of history, told not by the roar of cannons, but by the quiet whispers of the wind. Let the tension leave your shoulders. Feel the weight of the day drift away and allow your breath to slow. We are going back. Further back than kingdoms, further back than cities, into a time defined by two things: immensity and silence. We begin in the deep folds of the Upper Paleolithic, a time so vast it swallows centuries whole. Imagine the world not as a frantic, buzzing place, but as a colossal, frozen cathedral. This is the Ice Age, an era not of constant blizzards, but of profound, pervasive cold. The air itself is thin, sharp, and purifying. Beneath skies that seem infinitely far away, we settle in Europe, perhaps in the rugged limestone landscapes of what will one day be France or Spain. The glaciers are immense, not immediately visible, but their presence is a crushing weight that dictates every aspect of life. They lock up the water, dropping the sea level, revealing plains and land bridges that will one day vanish beneath the waves. Listen. What do you hear? Nothing rushed. The dominant sound is the absence of sound. No engines, no sirens, no manufactured hum. Only the occasional, distant sigh of the wind as it combs through the sparse tundra grass, or the faint, echoing trickle of meltwater deep within a crevice. We are looking for shelter. We are looking for the entrance to a cave. Not a shallow overhang, but a true dwelling, a mouth of stone, often facing south or west to catch the weak winter sun, high above the river valley. The entrance is choked with the detritus of millennia, fine dust, broken bone fragments, and the constant, patient drip of water forming slow mineral architecture. We step over the threshold. The light changes instantly. It doesn't disappear. It thins, becoming diffused and ethereal. The outside world, the world of vast, white landscape and colossal, moving herds, recedes. We are enveloped by the embrace of stone. The temperature stabilizes, warmer than the outside air, but possessing a damp, earthy chill that only disappears near the center of our future home. Feel the floor beneath your hands. It is smooth in places, polished by generations of feet, and damp in others. The walls are rough, cool, and smell of minerals, moisture, and time itself. This is the oldest home humanity has ever known. This cave is the nucleus of human history. Everything we are, everything we built, started here, in this deep, cold, and utterly silent space. In the center of the living space, everything pivots around a central, dark patch of earth, the hearth. If the cave is the body of our home, the hearth is its slow, steady heart. Before permanent settlement, before writing, before sophisticated tools, there was fire. Fire is not just warmth. It is the first act of civilization. It pushes back the terrifying, unseen things that prowl in the blackness just beyond its golden reach. Imagine the work of tending it. It is a slow, methodical ritual, performed not with matches or lighters, but with patience and friction. Finding the right wood dry, resinous, and hard-won from the meager surrounding landscape is a vital task. The wood is placed, often in a gentle teepee shape or laid across existing banked embers. The sound of the fire becomes the new rhythm of life. It's a quiet, hypnotic sound, the gentle sizzle of moisture escaping the fibers, the soft, irregular crack of the wood splitting, and the constant, low hiss as oxygen is drawn into the core. This sound, this rhythmic breathing of the flame, is the first lullaby. The light it casts is transformative. It is not the harsh total light of the sun, but a flickering, warm, amber glow. It animates the smooth walls, making the shadows dance like ancient spirits. It defines the space, the zone of light where safety, cooking, storytelling, and sleep occur in the zone of darkness, the rest of the cave, where the cold and the unknown remain. Around the hearth, life is organized in silent, efficient ways. We see the family group, maybe 20 or 30 individuals. Their movements are minimal, energy conservation being the highest priority in a world of scarcity. Their communication is often nonverbal, a slight shift in posture, the placement of a tool, a meaningful glance across the flames. The language of survival is the language of quiet efficiency. The cooking is slow, turning tough meat into digestible sustenance. The smoke rises, darkening the upper dome of the cave, acting as a natural insect repellent and a preservative. The heat radiates outwards, sinking into the stone floor, making the immediate area a pocket of hard-won comfort against the global freeze. This is stability. This is the first spark. Our ancestors did not live a life of constant, desperate struggle, but rather a life of profound observation and meticulous craft. The Paleolithic mind was deeply focused on material science, understood not through equations, but through touch, weight, and sound. Look closer at the tools lying near the hearth. They are not crude clubs. They are works of sophisticated engineering. The material of choice is often flint or obsidian, a volcanic glass materials that fracture conchoidally, creating razor-sharp edges. The process of tool creation, or napping, is a meditative sound within the cave. It is the sound of control. Imagine the napper sitting cross-legged, a heavy stone hammer or an antler billet in hand. They strike the core stone, not with force, but with perfect, calculated precision. The sound is a sharp, short tink, each sound signaling the controlled detachment of a flake. These flakes are not waste. They are the finished products, scrapers for hide, awls for bone, and points for spears. This process is slow. It takes hours to transform a rough nodule into a balanced hand axe, a biface, that fits perfectly into the palm. Its purpose communicated by its shape alone. This tool is not disposable. It is cherished, maintained, and often passed down. The mystery of the atlatla, the spear thrower, begins here. It is a simple wooden device that dramatically increases the leverage and speed of the throw. It shows a profound understanding of physics, a capacity for abstract problem solving, and the deep, silent coordination required for a successful cooperative hunt. The tools reveal the Paleolithic diet and resourcefulness. Besides stone points, there are needles carved from bone, so fine they could stitch together waterproof garments of fur and hide. There are carved pendants and beads, indicating not just survival, but an emerging sense of adornment and self-awareness. The tools whisper of a world where nothing is wasted. Every bone is cracked for marrow, every tendon used for sinew, every hide tanned and softened. It is a life lived in complete ecological balance, where survival depends entirely on a respectful, silent understanding of the natural world. To understand the Paleolithic mind, we must understand the environment it navigated. The landscape was defined by the presence of colossal, roaming animals. These were not marginal creatures. They were the pillars of the ecosystem and the primary resource for human survival. Imagine looking out from the cave mouth on a cold, bright day. In the valley below, you see the silhouettes of a herd of woolly mammoths. They move slowly, deliberately, their huge, shaggy forms like moving geological features. Their sound is low, a resonant rumble that vibrates in the chest, the sound of immense, slow power. There are also herds of bison, their thick coats insulating them against the cold, and the fast-moving, sleek forms of the reindeer or caribou in the far distance. These animals are not just food. They are sources of clothing, shelter, tents of hide, tools, bone, and fuel, fat, The human relationship with these animals is one of reverent intimacy. The hunt is not a sport. It is an economic necessity and a spiritual transaction. It requires planning, tracking, patience, and a deep knowledge of animal behavior knowledge built up over countless generations. The silent art of tracking requires the hunter to virtually become the animal, reading the barely visible signs of a snapped twig, a misplaced stone, or the subtle cooling of a footprint. The ultimate danger, however, is the cave bear or the saber-toothed cat. These were the true rulers of the caves, often forcing human groups to reclaim the space after a long silent struggle. The memory of these encounters, the smell, the size, the terrifying speed is indelibly etched into the collective consciousness. It is in the shadows cast by these great beasts that human social cooperation intensifies. A single hunter cannot bring down a mammoth. It requires the synchronized effort of the entire group, working as a single coordinated intelligence. The success of the hunt is a silent communal celebration. The failure, a quiet, shared hardship. The animals, therefore, are more than creatures. They are the personification of the life force. They are mystery, sustenance, and danger, all wrapped into one massive moving presence. This reverence is what leads us to the heart of the Paleolithic mystery. Now we move away from the light of the hearth. We extinguish our firebrands and light small handheld lampstishes of stone with animal fat as fuel and a wick of moss. This light is weak, smoky, and focuses our attention entirely on the immediate foreground. We are leaving the domestic area and moving into the deep cave. This journey is not casual. It is a deliberate, difficult, and potentially perilous act. We crawl through narrow, twisting passages, the meanders where the air is thick and damp, and the only sound is the grinding of leather and stone as we pull ourselves forward. We rappel down slippery, slick rock faces and cross underground streams whose cold, silent water washes away the dust of the outer world. The further we go, the more the outside world ceases to exist. We enter a realm of absolute darkness and unearthly acoustics. The silence here is immense, oppressive, and purifying. It is a silence unbroken by the ordinary sounds of the living world. Why did our ancestors risk injury and death to travel hundreds of meters into the earth, where there is no food, no warmth, and no immediate shelter? Because here, deep within the earth, is the sanctuary. The walls begin to change. They are no longer just cold, damp rock. They are canvases. We hold up our flickering lamp, and the light catches the surface, revealing figures painted in ochre, manganese, and charcoal. This is the cave art. It is not just art. It is a profound, mysterious act of communication directed at forces we cannot see or understand. Look at the images. The great animals we just imagined, bison, mammoths, aurochs, horses. They are depicted with astonishing anatomical accuracy and dynamic energy. They are often rendered in profile, capturing their essence with minimal lines. The walls are not flat. They are three-dimensional. The artist deliberately used the natural curves, ridges, and lumps of the stone surface to give the animals shape, muscle, and dimension. A natural crack becomes the back of a bison. A bulge in the rock becomes the belly of a pregnant mar. These were not casual sketches. The pigments were carefully prepared, ground with fat, and often applied with brushes made of moss hair, or blown through hollow bone tubes, the earliest form of spray painting. The mystery deepens because many of the paintings are placed in parts of the cave that are almost impossible to reach. They are hidden. They were not meant for public viewing or decoration of the domestic space. They were meant for the ritual, for the moment of creation itself. This deep cave is where the boundary between the material world and the spiritual world dissolves. It is a place of quiet magic, where the act of painting the animal was perhaps an attempt to control its spirit, to ensure the success of the hunt, or to simply honor the life that sustained the group. We stand here, hundreds of centuries later, sharing the same silence, the same air, and the same flickering lamplight that illuminated the hand of the artist. The Paleolithic mystery is the realization that consciousness precedes civilization. The greatest questions: who are we? What is our place? What is sacred? Were asked in the dark, whispered into the stone. Long before the first city rose. As we move deeper, past the great depictions of the herds, we find something smaller, but perhaps more profoundly moving: the stenciled handprint. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of hands are stenciled onto the cold rock face. Negative images of palms and fingers, created by blowing pigment around a hand pressed firmly against the wall. These are not just representations of animals. These are self-portraits. They are the first signatures in human history. They are the quiet, undeniable proof of a self-aware being declaring, "I was here." Notice the hands. Many of them are those of women, children, and teenagers, not just the hands of adult male hunters. This suggests that the ritual and the artistic creation were communal acts, involving the entire social structure, not just a male hunting elite. More mysteriously, some of the hands appear to be missing fingers or parts of fingers. This has sparked intense, quiet debate among archaeologists. Is it the result of intentional, ritualistic amputation? Or simply the silent language of the cold, frostbite having claimed the tips of digits during the brutal deep winter? We do not know the answer. The mystery is wrapped in the silent shadow of the stenciled hand. These handprints represent the birth of abstract thought. The hand is a tool, a symbol, and a physical presence. By leaving its ghostly imprint on the eternal stone, our ancestor bridged the gap between the fleeting biological life and the endless geological time. They were asserting their existence against the immensity of the Paleolithic void. We touch the cold rock near one of these prints. It is a moment of connection, transcending the 30,000 years that separate us. The air here is still, holding the memory of their breath, their whispered chants, and the gentle, repetitive sound of the pigment being blown. The deep cave is not just a gallery. It is the archive of the soul. It is where we find the first record of human imagination, the earliest evidence of a mind capable of abstract, symbolic, and spiritual thought. The story is not told in words, but in shapes, colors, and the silent, simple declaration of a hand on the wall. As we slowly retreat from the innermost sanctum, our small smoky lamp leads us back toward the fainter light of the domestic chamber. Even in this transitional space, the evidence of a rich inner life persists. We find small, carved objects, testaments to time spent in non-essential, purely creative labor. These are not tools for survival, but objects of meaning. Imagine a small, smooth piece of bone, perhaps 4 or 5 centimeters long. It is covered in meticulously carved geometric patterns, tiny crosses, parallel lines, and chevrons scored into the hard material. These may be tallies, records of moons, tides, or game taken. Or perhaps they are simply patterns for their own sake, a form of meditative, repetitive art to pass the long hours of the deep winter. We find Venus figurines, small, portable sculptures of the human female form, often exaggerated in their curves, breasts, and hips. These figures are not portraits. They are symbols of fertility, abundance, and the mysterious power of life creation. They are small enough to be carried, a silent, comforting presence on the long, dangerous migrations. They are the first quiet deities, focusing the hopes of the clan on survival and continuance. And then there is the ochre. This is the red pigment iron oxide found throughout the cave, used for painting, but also found rubbed onto the bodies of the dead and the living. Red is the color of blood, the color of life, the color of the setting sun. The grinding of the ochre, a slow, back-breaking, repetitive motion, was itself a ritual, transforming hard mineral into soft, life-giving color. The use of adornment beads of shell teeth, And bone further proves the presence of a social hierarchy and an identity beyond the purely functional. Wearing a necklace of carved shells meant you had traded with people near the distant coast. Wearing the teeth of a cave bear meant you had survived an almost impossible encounter. These objects told a story, silently broadcasting status and achievement within the small, intimate group. Life in the Paleolithic was paradoxically intensely focused on both the practical and the poetic. Survival was based on stone tools, but community was based on shared symbols, quiet rituals, and the deep, silent understanding of the sacred nature of existence. The light of the hearth grows stronger as we finally exit the deep, cold passages. We are back in the main chamber, the air filled with the familiar, comforting smell of smoke and banked fire. The story of the Paleolithic cave is not one of explosion or speed, but of endurance and slow, deliberate adaptation. For tens of thousands of years, this rhythm held the slow cycle of the hunt, the cold weight of the winter, the return to the safety of the stone mouth, and the silent, flickering magic of the paintings inside. But now, the ice is beginning to withdraw. Very, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, the global cold is softening. This transition, which marks the end of the Paleolithic and the dawn of the Mesolithic, is not a sudden revolution, but a gentle, gradual shift. The herds of giant animals begin to move north, seeking the cold. The landscape begins to change, the open tundra giving way to dense, confusing forests. The deep caves, once essential shelters against the cold, become less necessary as temperatures rise. Our Paleolithic ancestors watch the change with the same silent, profound observation that characterized their entire existence. Their tools will change. They will become smaller, more modular, adaptable to the forest hunting of smaller, faster deer and boar. They will invent the bow and arrow, a refinement of the spear thrower, requiring less space and more precision. The great cave sanctuaries will fall silent. The last handprints will be stenciled. The final layer of charcoal will be applied to the wall of a deep chamber, and the artist will slowly turn, extinguishing their lamp, leaving the great, painted beasts to their eternal frozen darkness. The cave dwellers will move out, following the changing climate and the receding animals. They will leave behind a legacy that is not of monuments, but of interiority, the idea that the deepest parts of life are found not in the shouting of the marketplace, but in the quiet, meditative shadows of the self. As the Paleolithic chapter closes, we are left with the quiet realization that our most essential human qualities, our capacity for art, our desire for meaning, our skill in cooperation, and our ability to transcend mere physical existence through abstract thought, were perfected not under the bright sun of civilization, but in the deep, warm shadows of the Paleolithic cave. Let the sound of the crackling fire now soften into a gentle hum. Allow the images of the quiet, patient Paleolithic life, the tink of the napper, the rumble of the mammoth, the flicker of the grease lamp to become indistinct, comforting echoes. You are safe. You are warm. You are sheltered in the embrace of ancient history. Settle back now and feel the gentle shift in temperature. We are moving forward in time, but the pace remains profoundly slow. The millennia that follow the Paleolithic are defined by a singular, immense process, the Great Thaw. The Ice Age did not end with a sudden crack or a geological tremor. It faded. The vast continental glaciers, those colossal, slow-moving oceans of ice, began their quiet, dignified retreat. This process was not a rush. It was a seep, a weeping, a gradual release of frozen water back into the hydrological cycle. Listen to the sound of this transformation. It is the sound of water. In the spring, the immense meltwater torrents carve new riverbeds, rushing and turbulent. In the summer, the sound is the constant, irregular drip, drip, drip from the ice faces, a liquid clock measuring the end of the frozen world. As the ice retreats, the land rebounds. The sheer weight of the ice sheet had depressed the crust of the earth. Now freed from the burden, the land rises again in a process called isostatic rebound, an almost imperceptible, millimeter by millimeter lift of the continents. This is the background process of the Mesolithic. Slow, unstoppable, silent geological change. The atmosphere changes too. It is no longer thin and sharp. It becomes thick with moisture, heavy with the scent of thawing earth, and newly released organic matter. The cold air gives way to humidity and mist. We are now in Europe, spanning roughly 10,000 BC, e to 5,000 BC, e the Middle Stone Age, or Mesolithic. This is the interim time, a bridge era, existing between the great hunters of the ice and the great farmers of the settled age. It is the age of transition, the age of the forest, the vast, open, grassy tundras that sustained the mammoths and woolly rhinos are being choked. The permafrost is melting, and a new dominant botanical life form is taking hold, the tree. Birch, pine, oak, and hazel advance across the landscape, not in sudden invasion, but through a slow, quiet, persistent colonization of the newly warmed soil. The life of our ancestors must adapt completely. The old way, following the large herds across open plains, is no longer possible. The animals, too, have changed. The mammoths are gone. The colossal bison are replaced by smaller, faster prey. The red deer, the wild boar, and the creatures of the dense undergrowth. The defining characteristic of the Mesolithic life is versatility and intimacy with the forest. They are no longer the people of the cave. They are the people of the woods. The Mesolithic settlement is no longer the deep cave. It is often a temporary, lightweight shelter constructed near the ecotone, the forest edge, where the woods meet the water. Imagine the Mesolithic camp. It is a cluster of small, dome-shaped huts, often framed with bent hazel poles and covered with layers of birch bark, hide, or woven mats. They are easy to construct and dismantle, reflecting a life of essential mobility. Though less extensive than the Paleolithic nomadism, the sounds of the Mesolithic are richer, more layered than the Paleolithic silence. First, there is the wind in the canopy. Not the harsh, whistling wind over the ice, but the sound of air moving through millions of leaves. It's a constant, soothing shush or hiss. Second, the water. Mesolithic sites are often beside lakes, marshes, or rivers, rich in fish and waterfowl. The sound of the Mesolithic is the gentle slap of waves against the shore, the chirp of insects in the reeds, and the splash of a fisherman casting a net or setting a weir. Third, the sounds of woodworking. The dense forest offers endless material. The sharp thwack of the stone axe against the trunk. The slow groan of a falling tree, the repetitive, satisfying scraping of a skin stretched over a frame. The central fire is still vital, but its purpose is subtly different. It is not just a defiance against the cold, but a means to manage the landscape. Our ancestors used fire to clear small patches of forest, promoting the growth of certain grasses and fruit-bearing plants, creating small managed glades that would attract the deer. This is the first, quiet step toward landscape gardening. Their movements are fluid and adaptable. They are experts in camouflage, masters of moving through thick brush without snapping a twig. Their patience is immense, sitting motionless by a deer trail for hours, becoming just another part of the woodland architecture, waiting for the precise, quiet moment to act. The forest dictates a life of detailed focus. The macro hunting of the Ice Age is replaced by the micro gathering of the woodland. Every berry, every root, every medicinal plant must be known intimately. The Mesolithic person is a walking encyclopedia of botany and ecology. The change in the environment demanded a revolutionary change in technology. The massive Paleolithic tools, designed for large, tough hides and massive bones, were too cumbersome for the fast-moving, smaller game of the forest. The Mesolithic innovation is the MICROIT of imagine a flake of flint, carefully knapped into a tiny, geometrically precise shape, a triangle, a trapezoid, or a crescent. These are not tools in themselves, but components. The microliths were set into grooves, carved into a shaft of wood or bone, using natural adhesives like tree resin or birch tar. This process is slow and meticulous. The knapper sits, working with extreme patience, producing dozens of these small, sharp inserts. The sound is a quiet, continuous scratching and pressing as the tiny pieces are fitted into the handle. The resulting tools were modular and efficient. A single wooden shaft could hold many small microliths, creating a barbed spear, a serrated knife, or the cutting edge of a sickle used for harvesting wild grains. If one small piece broke, it could be easily replaced. This marks a massive leap in efficiency and repairability. The greatest technological advance, however, is the widespread adoption of the bow and arrow dot. The making of the bow is a testament to Mesolithic craftsmanship. Finding the perfect, resilient piece of yew or elm, slowly, carefully bending it into a curve, selecting and twisting the sinew for the string. The process demands an understanding of the wood's internal stresses and flexures. The arrow is a masterpiece of balance and aerodynamics. The wooden shaft must be perfectly straight. The microlith arrowhead must be precisely centered. The fletching feathers at the back must be applied with care to ensure stable flight. The bow and arrow change the geometry of the hunt. It allows for a standoff distance, reducing the risk to the hunter. It requires tremendous control, stillness, and patience, but its sound is quick and lethal. The sharp thwack of the released string, followed by the quiet whiz of the arrow cutting the air. This new, quiet weapon allowed Mesolithic groups to survive the dense complexity of the forest. The melting ice brought not just forests, but an abundance of inland water, lakes, peat bogs, and swollen, permanent rivers. The Mesolithic people became the first true maritime cultures. Their mastery begins with the dugout canoe. Imagine the enormous effort involved, finding a single large, straight log, often pine or oak, slowly burning out the core of the wood with fire, and then scraping and chiseling away the remaining charred material with stone adzes. This entire process could take weeks or even months of steady, repetitive labor. The sound of the dugout being hollowed out is the soft, rhythmic thud and scrape, a meditative sound that reflects the value of the completed vessel. The boat is not just transport. It is a floating platform for existence. With the canoes, they become masters of fishing. They do not just spear fish in the shallows. They invent sophisticated methods, weirs and traps, building stone or wooden barriers in the river to funnel fish into catching areas, nets, weaving plant fibers, flax, nettle, hemp into durable nets of painstaking, repetitive work of knotting and weaving that fills the quiet hours of the camp, hooks, carving fish hooks from bone, often barbed and meticulously polished. The water provides a crucial stability that the land hunt sometimes lacked. Fish and shellfish provide a reliable, predictable source of protein, especially during the long, cold winters. The Mesolithic camp, therefore, is permeated by the smell of salt and fresh water, the glistening sheen of freshly caught fish, and the low, constant gurgle of the nearby stream. Their intimate knowledge of the flow of the water, the deep pools, the fast currents, the spawning grounds is as vital as their knowledge of the forest floor. The canoe, drifting silently across the surface of a misty lake, the gentle dip of the paddle, the patience required to draw a net. These are the images of the Mesolithic life. They speak of a society living in perfect harmony with the rhythms of water, a quiet, aquatic adaptation. In the quiet transition from the Paleolithic to the Mesolithic, a moment of profound, mysterious connection occurs, the domestication of the wolf. This was not a rapid conquest. It was a slow, mutual adaptation that spanned hundreds of generations. The wolves that lived near the human camps, the ones that were less aggressive, perhaps more curious and better at scavenging, found a reliable food source. The humans, in turn, found an invaluable asset. Imagine the sound of the Mesolithic night. The familiar sounds of the camp are punctuated by the soft, occasional whine or sigh of the proto-dog sleeping near the fire's perimeter. The dog provides an early warning system. Its superior senses detect approaching dangers, a wild boar, a predator, or a rival human group, long before the human ear can register them. Its bark or growl is the first crucial layer of defense, allowing the humans to sleep more deeply. More importantly, the dog transforms the hunt. A wolf pack is designed for endurance, not stealth. The dog, working with humans, combines the best of both: the human's abstract planning and the dog's relentless tracking, speed, and nose. The collaboration is silent, based on trust and mutual understanding, a quiet language of gesture and posture. The dog also serves a psychological role. In the deep, confusing, and sometimes frightening density of the forest, the presence of an intelligent, loyal companion, a being that actively chooses to remain, is a powerful comfort. This relationship, founded in the quiet, shared shadows of the hearth, is perhaps the oldest, most enduring psychological bond in human history. The first domestication was not of a food source, but of a sentient partner. This fact speaks volumes about the priorities of the Mesolithic mind. Cooperation and companionship were as essential to survival as fire and flint. The Mesolithic leaves behind some of the most moving and mysterious evidence of human belief and emotion, primarily found in its burial sites. Unlike the Paleolithic practice of burying the dead deep in caves or marked with red ochre, the Mesolithic dead are often interred within the living space, inside the floor of the hut or directly beneath the camp's fire pit. This suggests an intense, intimate bond with the deceased and a powerful desire to keep them close. Imagine the scene at the site of Ofnet Cave in Bavaria, or Vedbak in Denmark. At Ofnet, 33 human skulls, belonging to men, women, and children, were carefully placed in 2 pits facing the setting sun. Each skull was richly decorated with necklaces of deer teeth and snail shells, and smeared with red ochre. The rest of the skeleton was not present. This deliberate, meticulous arrangement of only the skulls, decorated with symbols of the hunt and the sea, points to a ritual of head veneration, a quiet, focused honoring of the seat of life and memory. At Vedbak, the intimacy is even clearer. A young woman was buried with her newborn baby, laid on a swan's wing. Nearby, another grave contained 2 young people, killed by bone points embedded in their bodies, perhaps a sign of conflict or ritual sacrifice. The most common characteristic of these burials is the placement of grave goods, necklaces, tools, fishing hooks, and sometimes the small, tenderly placed bones of a domesticated dog. These offerings are silent assurances that the deceased is prepared for the journey, and a quiet, profound expression of the survivor's sorrow. The Mesolithic people were clearly wrestling with the massive, existential questions of life and death. The act of burial is not just disposal. It is a ritual of memory and a spiritual architecture for the dead. The silence of the forest is broken by the quiet, shared grief of the living and the meticulous, comforting work of preparing the body for its final, eternal rest within the earth that sustained the community. As we move toward the final centuries of the Mesolithic era, a new sound begins to drift on the wind, a sound that signals the end of the long wanderings. It is the sound of permanence. The Mesolithic peoples, through their intense adaptation, have inadvertently laid the groundwork for the next great revolution: landscape management. By using fire to clear glades and encouraging certain plant life, they created semi-managed environments. They learned which wild grains grew best and how to process them, grinding them with querns, specialized tools. The development of the sickle, microliths set into a curved handle, was originally for harvesting wild grains and reeds. But it was a tool perfectly suited for farming. Sedentary tendencies, sites rich in aquatic resources like the Danube gorges or coastal shell middens, allowed groups to remain in one place for longer periods, building larger, more permanent structures. This sedentary lifestyle reduced the pressure to move and increased the incentive to invest labor into the surrounding land, basketry and pottery. The Mesolithic saw the rise of complex weaving for nets and baskets, and in some areas, the very first crude forms of pottery, heavy, coarse vessels used for storing the newly abundant wild grains and processed foods. The sound of the potter's hands shaping the clay, the slow squish and mush, is the sound of a settled future. The crucial event is taking place in the Fertile Crescent, thousands of miles away. The domestication of grains and sheep is happening, slowly, quietly, but irrevocably. And soon, the knowledge, the seed of change, will travel slowly westward along the Mediterranean and through the newly dense forests of Europe. The long, misty wanderings of the Mesolithic are nearing their end. The age of the hunter-gatherer, the age of the adaptable woodsman, is transitioning into the age of the farmer. The shift is not a violent break, but a quiet, gentle assimilation. The Mesolithic person does not stop hunting. They simply add the rhythm of the planting cycle to their existing knowledge. The forest, the great sanctuary of the Middle Age, will slowly be pushed back, giving way to the grit of the field. The Mesolithic lifestyle, defined by movement, water, and the detailed knowledge of the wild, is about to be superseded by the stability and monotony of agriculture. Let the final images of the Mesolithic drift over you. The silent canoe gliding across the misty lake, the gentle whine of the dog by the hearth, the rhythmic sizzle of fish cooking over the fire. Feel the slow, deep release of the earth from the grip of the ice. The cold has passed, and you are sheltered, warm, and lulled by the quiet sounds of the ancient, adaptable forest. You are in the silence of transition, a quiet, peaceful space between two great human epochs. We are shifting our focus now, not only geographically but conceptually. Allow the gentle humidity of the Mesolithic forest to recede, and feel the dry, ancient air of the Near East settle around you. We are in Upper Mesopotamia, in the rolling, arid plains of what will one day be southeastern Turkey. The time is approximately 9,600 BCE. This is a span of human history so remote that we previously believed it was a time of simple hunter-gatherer existence. The very cusp of the Neolithic. Look around. The landscape is wide, sparse, and dominated by a low, artificial mound rising above the plain. Its name in Turkish is Göbekli Tepe, the Potbelly Hill, or perhaps more poetically, the Hill of the Navel, the place of origin. Göbekli Tepe is a profound anomaly. It challenges the most fundamental assumption of history, the idea that agriculture leads to settlement, and settlement leads to civilization. Here, we find the clear evidence that the opposite may be true. Ritual and shared belief may have led to settlement. Listen to the initial sounds of this place. Unlike the deep silence of the Paleolithic cave or the soft sounds of the Mesolithic forest, the dominant sound here is the dry, continuous hum of the wind moving across the open, exposed hill. It is a sound that has not changed for 12,000 years. Imagine standing on this hill before the modern excavations began. It would have appeared to be nothing more than a gently mounded tell, a geological feature shaped by centuries of dust and debris. But beneath the surface, waiting in the cool embrace of the earth, lay the oldest known monumental architecture in the world, predating Stonehenge by 6 millennia and the Egyptian pyramids by 7. The mystery of Göbekli Tepe is rooted in its unnecessary complexity. Why, in a time when every moment should have been dedicated to the strenuous act of survival, did a group of people, hunter-gatherers, not farmers, undertake an immense, coordinated labor effort to carve, transport, and erect massive stone monuments? The quiet answer whispered by the site is that belief required it. Now we descend into the excavated pits. The site is not a single structure, but a series of distinct, large, circular and oval enclosures designated A, B, C, and D. Each enclosure is an architectural marvel of the pre-pottery Neolithic era. Focus on a single primary structure, enclosure D. It measures up to 30 meters in diameter. Its perimeter is formed by thick, rough stone walls made of unworked, rubble-filled stone. The heart of the mystery, however, lies in the pillars. Within each enclosure, standing proud and silent, are massive T-shaped limestone pillars. There are 2 colossal pillars standing parallel in the center, and a dozen more set into the surrounding wall. These pillars are not small. The central monoliths weigh between 10 to 20 tons and stand up to 5.5 meters tall. Imagine the sheer, collective effort required. The rock was quarried from a site nearly a kilometer away using only stone tools. It had to be carved, undercut, and then dragged across rough, undulating terrain by muscle and rope. The sound of this work, the grunts of exertion, the slow creak of ropes, the heavy scrape of stone against the ground, must have been immense, yet it was driven by a belief system we cannot grasp. The pillars themselves are not mere posts. They are abstract representations of the human form. Their T-shape is clearly designed to represent a stylized body. The narrow top is the head and shoulders. The body tapers down to a base. We know this because many of the pillars have clearly carved features, arms that run down the long sides, ending in hands that meet over the pelvic region, and sometimes a simple loincloth secured by a carved belt. They are the silent stone watchers. They stand sentinel, perpetually facing the center of the enclosure, suggesting an assembly of beings, perhaps ancestors, deities, or spiritual entities, observing a central ritual space. The geometry of the space is deliberate. The circular enclosures suggest a worldview focused on cycles and permanence. Standing between the 2 central pillars, one is enveloped by a feeling of profound antiquity and focused purpose. The air here is still dry and imbued with the quiet weight of the past. The most astonishing feature of the pillars are the relief carvings that adorn their surfaces. They are a silent, complex language carved into the stone, a visual library of the hunter-gatherer worldview. These are not domestic animals. These are the powerful primal figures of the wild world our ancestors knew. Vultures, often depicted with great emphasis, suggesting a role in sky burial or a link between the terrestrial world and the heavens. Snakes and spiders, winding, creeping creatures, emphasizing the chaotic, earthbound forces. Wild boar, rendered with fierce detail, their tusks prominently displayed. Aurochs, the enormous now extinct wild cattle, symbolizing massive strength. Lions and foxes, depicted with stylized ferocity and stealth. These carvings are incredibly lifelike and dynamic, yet they are placed on the pillars in a non-random, organized fashion. It is a bestiary of the soul, a taxonomy of the forces that ruled the hunter's existence. Danger, sustenance, and the mystery of the sky. Look closely at the surface of a pillar. The texture is rough, yet the carving is precise. Imagine the repetitive, slow sound of the flint or obsidian point scratching and chipping away at the limestone, hour after hour, day after day, driven by the need to perfectly render the essence of the animal. This was not hurried work. It was a meditative devotion. Often, the animals are depicted in strange, unnatural juxtapositions, or interacting with abstract symbols like the H symbol or the crescent and disc. This points to a complex mythological narrative, a lost story of creation, or a ritual map of the cosmos. The narratives are entirely contained within the stone, silent and impenetrable to the modern mind. The function of these carvings was not decorative. It was functional. These animals were the focus of the ritual, acting as powerful conduits between the participants and the spiritual world. The carvings are a testament to the fact that organized religion and complex mythology did not wait for cities. They were necessary components of the hunter's reality. Göbekli Tepe was not a permanent village. There is no evidence of extensive long-term housing, domestic hearths, or deep trash middens full of typical everyday waste. It was a periodic pilgrimage site, a massive, open-air cathedral built for collective ritual. The complexity of the site implies a large, temporary congregation. Groups of hunter-gatherers from hundreds of kilometers away from various ecological zones, speaking different dialects, must have agreed to meet here at specific times of the year, perhaps tied to astronomical events or migratory cycles. The central activity, besides the ritual within the enclosures, was the feast. Archaeological evidence shows massive amounts of animal bone refuse, primarily from wild gazelle and aurochs. These animals were hunted and consumed on an industrial scale, suggesting that the primary function of the gathering was a communal celebration and the consumption of rare, high-status meat. Imagine the scene on the hill during the pilgrimage. The roar of the communal fires used for roasting massive joints of meat. The bustle of hundreds of people interacting, exchanging news, tools, and perhaps marriage partners. The deep, resonant chanting as groups entered the enclosures. This coordination of labor and resources is the key to the mystery. To feed thousands of people temporarily, and to coordinate the creation of the monumental stone circles, required an advanced social organization, a non-hierarchical, communal authority structure based on shared spiritual urgency. The construction itself might have been part of the ritual. The physical labor of quarrying and moving the stone, done as a unified community, would have cemented their identity and shared purpose. The stone monuments are the physical manifestation of their social contract. Göbekli Tepe is where the hunter-gatherer world, usually dispersed and small-scale, learned to operate on a massive, unified scale for a non-economic purpose. The circular arrangement and orientation of the Göbekli Tepe enclosures suggest a link to the sky. Given that hunting required a deep knowledge of seasonal changes and night navigation, it is highly probable that the site functioned as an observatory or a celestial alignment device. Look up at the wide, unpolluted night sky above the hill. Without artificial light, the stars of the Neolithic era would have been dazzlingly bright. An overwhelming presence. While the alignments are complex, some researchers suggest that the orientation of the central T-pillars in enclosure D might have been aligned to the rising of a specific star, perhaps Sirius, at that time in history, marking a seasonal shift or a significant cosmological date. More strikingly, a pillar known as the Vulture Stone, Pillar 43, is interpreted by some as a commemorative event, potentially recording a catastrophic cosmic impact, like a comet fragment that occurred around 10,950 BCE, marking the beginning of the Younger Dryas period. The pillar depicts an array of animals, abstract symbols, and a curious disk that some believe represents the impact event itself. This pillar, then, would be the oldest known narrative in stone, a silent historical record carved for future generations. It would prove that these hunter-gatherers were keenly aware of their place in the cosmos and actively sought to record and understand major celestial events. Silence of Göbekli Tepe is the silence of an untold story. The stones are trying to tell us about the dawn of human astronomy, the birth of the epic narrative, and the beginning of a calendar system tied not to planting cycles, but to the deep, slow movements of the night sky. Perhaps the most compelling and confounding mystery of Göbekli Tepe is its end. The site was not abandoned due to war, fire, or collapse. It was deliberately buried. Around 8,200 BCE, after centuries of use, the community undertook a massive, sustained effort to intentionally inter the colossal enclosures. They filled the circles up to the top of the T-pillars with tons of earth, broken stone, and debris. They entombed the very structures they had worked so tirelessly to create. Imagine the slow, quiet ritual of this burial. It was a massive, collective act of decommissioning. The sounds would have been the endless thud of dirt and stone being shoveled, carried in baskets, and tipped into the sacred space. It was not destruction. It was a profound act of preservation and termination. Why? The reason is lost to time, but the act itself speaks volumes. Ritual closure. Perhaps the sacred purpose had been fulfilled, or the cosmology that demanded the circles had shifted. The monument was an active site, and once its purpose was complete, it had to be closed and returned to the earth. A massive offering. Changing beliefs. The people living nearby were beginning to transition toward agriculture, domesticating pigs and starting to cultivate wild grains. The old religion of the great hunters, the religion of the wild aurochs and the fearsome vulture may have lost its central relevance. Preservation. By burying the site, they ensured its longevity, protecting the fragile reliefs and the alignment of the pillars from the elements. Göbekli Tepe did not burn. It was laid to rest. The hill of the navel was carefully covered, keeping its secret safe for over 10,000 years, waiting for the technology of the future to slowly peel back the layers of dust and time. As we conclude our time with the silent stone watchers, let the immensity of the silence return. This site proves that human ambition precedes human necessity, that the first architectural imperative was not to build a shelter for the body, but a sanctuary for the soul. The sheer mystery of Göbekli Tepe is a quiet, profound reminder that we know less about the origins of our own species than we think. Feel the dry wind of the ancient plains. The mighty pillars stand still, the bestiary silent, sleeping beneath the dust. The world is about to change forever with the coming of agriculture. But here, on this high hill, the true spark of civilization, the spark of collective belief, has already been ignited. Carved into the enduring stone, we move now from the silent, monumental ritual of Göbekli Tepe to a different kind of silence, the patient, expectant stillness of the arable earth. The time is roughly 9000 BCE. The location is the heartland of the Near East, the crescent-shaped strip of well-watered land that arches across modern-day Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. This region is often called the Fertile Crescent. It is not a place of dense, forbidding forests like the Mesolithic North, nor is it the frozen tundra of the Paleolithic. It is a mosaic of open woodland, dry steppe, and crucially, the hilly flanks where the wild ancestors of grains and animals naturally thrive. Feel the air here. It is warmer than the deep past, but still dry and fragrant with the scent of wild grasses and sun-baked soil. The light is bright, but not harsh, filtered by the high, slow movement of the clouds. The great mystery we are about to explore is the Neolithic Revolution, the single most profound shift in human history. Known not for its violence or speed, but for its slowness and silent permanence. This was not a revolution of a year or a century, but a creeping, gradual change that unfolded over 3,000 years. The defining sound of this era is monotony. It is the sound of repetition, the quiet rhythm of work that dictates life, day after day, season after season. We are observing the change in the human relationship with the world. Before, we were takers moving through the landscape, carefully harvesting what nature offered. Now we are becoming producers, investing labor, imposing human will, and fundamentally changing the genetic code of the plants and animals around us. We are moving from the freedom of the hunter to the anchored responsibility of the farmer. The transition to agriculture was not a sudden stroke of genius. It began with an act of intense, silent observation. Our ancestors, the Mesolithic inhabitants of this region, had already learned to harvest the naturally occurring wild grains, wild wheat, einkorn and emmer, and wild barley. These grains were abundant on the hilly flanks. The women of the group, who were the primary gatherers, would walk out carrying baskets and gently beat the stalks, collecting the heavy, ripe kernels. The sound of this process is the soft, dry shush of the stalks being beaten and the gentle, irregular rattle of the grains falling into the woven basket. The quiet, crucial realization was this: not all grains are equal. Wild grasses have a genetic trait called a brittle rachis, the part that holds the seed to the stalk. When ripe, the brittle rachis snaps easily, scattering the seed so it can self-sow. This is great for the plant, but terrible for the harvester. However, occasionally, a mutant plant would appear with a tough rachis, a genetic anomaly that meant the seeds remained attached to the stalk even when ripe. These were the plants the humans easily harvested and brought back to the camp when these collected seeds were scattered by accident or intention near the camp. They established a lineage of plants that needed human intervention to thrive. They could not successfully self-sow, as their seeds stayed on the stalk. The plant became utterly dependent on the human hand for its survival. This subtle, silent genetic shift is the first contract between humanity and nature. The human provides the soil, the water, and the protection. The plant provides stability, predictability, and sustenance. The Neolithic revolution began not with a plow, but with this tiny genetic mutation, a quiet, powerful error in nature that we exploited for survival. The slow rhythm of the first harvest now demands a new, fixed sequence of labor. Life is now measured by the seasons of the field, not by the migration of the herd. Clearing and preparing. The first step is the hardest: clearing the land. The sound of the Mesolithic axe now gives way to the sound of the digging stick and the primitive hoe. It is a slow, rhythmic chop and scrape, the sound of breaking through the tough, virgin topsoil and turning it over to the sun and air. This backbreaking work must be repeated every season. Sowing. This is the most hopeful and quietest task. The farmer walks slowly across the prepared ground, scattering the carefully saved seeds from the previous harvest. The sound is the gentle rustling sprinkle of the seeds falling onto the loose earth, a sound loaded with the anxiety and hope for the coming year. This is the act of faith. The future is literally dropped into the dirt. Waiting and weeding. The long period of growth is defined by watchful patience. The air is quiet, broken only by the gentle scratching of the weeds being pulled from between the tender green shoots. This is monotonous, repetitive labor. The focus is entirely on the small area of the field. The constant battle against the encroachment of the wild. The shift to agriculture demands a changed perspective of time. The hunter lives in the present moment, focused on the immediate task. The farmer lives in the future, constantly anticipating the next season, worrying about the next drought, and planning the next harvest. This invention of future-focused anxiety is a Neolithic byproduct. The new, intense labor of farming made the nomadic Mesolithic lifestyle impossible. You cannot carry a field on your back. The farmer is anchored to the plot of land that holds the promise of the next meal. This necessity led to the birth of the permanent village. Imagine the transition. The lightweight, temporary huts of the forest are replaced by durable, circular or rectangular structures made of mud brick, adobe. The mud is mixed with straw, pressed into wooden molds, and left to dry slowly in the intense sun. The sound of the mud brick construction is the thud of the clay being pressed, the slap of the mortar, and the shuffle of the builder's feet on the packed earth. It is a slow, heavy, permanent sound. We look at places like Jericho, Palestine, or Cataluyuk, Turkey. Jericho, one of the earliest known permanent settlements, was guarded by a massive stone wall and a deep ditch built around 8,000 BCE. Why did a small farming village need such colossal defense? Because the concentration of stored wealth, grain, made them a target. The quiet stability of agriculture paradoxically created the need for massive communal defense. Cataluyuk was a dense, extraordinary village where houses were built side by side. sharing walls with entry only from the roof. The community moved across the rooftops, creating a continuous, quiet landscape of domestic activity. The inside of the houses, however, reveals a rich spiritual life, with bull horns mounted on walls and ancestors buried directly beneath the floor, maintaining the quiet intimacy with the dead found in the Mesolithic. The village created a new kind of social stability and a new kind of social tension. Life is fixed, close, and intensely communal. The constant, quiet sound of 100 neighbors working, talking, and living in close proximity is the new background hum of human existence. The move to permanent settlement and a reliance on a few staple crops brought unexpected, quiet hardships that the hunter-gatherer never knew. Dietary instability. The hunter's diet was incredibly diverse and nutritionally rich. The farmer's diet, centered on 1 or 2 grains, led to nutritional deficiencies. Archaeological analysis of Neolithic skeletons shows an increase in iron deficiency, anemia, and evidence of stress marks on teeth, hypoplasias. The move to civilization was, for the individual, often a step down in health and lifespan. Disease. The close proximity of permanent dwellings and the permanent presence of domesticated animals led to the silent proliferation of zoonotic diseases, pathogens jumping from animals to humans. Measles, smallpox, and influenza are all zoonotic diseases that became endemic due to the new Neolithic density. The air of the village, unlike the clean air of the Mesolithic woods, was heavy with the presence of sickness, the tyranny of storage. The single biggest anxiety of the Neolithic world was storage. Grain is wealth, but it is also highly vulnerable to rot, pests, mice, insects, and mold. The development of robust pottery, the true Neolithic invention, was driven by the urgent need to protect the surplus that stood between the community and starvation. The sound of the pest, the quiet scuttle of a mouse in the grain silo, became a sound of existential dread. The move to agriculture was a Faustian bargain. It allowed more people to survive in a smaller area, population density, but it lowered the overall quality of life and introduced new vulnerabilities. The quiet sound of communal life masked the silent, increased threat of famine and epidemic. The stability and the surplus created by farming allowed for the emergence of the first specialists, people who did not have to spend all their time gathering food. This specialization leads to the great, quiet technological leaps of the Neolithic. Pottery, the invention of firing clay to make durable vessels. The quiet, intense heat of the kiln. The patient work of wedging the clay, the simple, satisfying thump of the finished pot being set down. These are the new sounds of culture. Weaving. The availability of flax and wool from domesticated sheep led to the invention of the loom. The rhythmic, repetitive clack and thud of the loom, a soothing, mechanical sound, becomes the soundtrack of the domestic space, producing clothing far softer and more durable than simple tanned hides. Most importantly, the farmer invented time. The rhythm of the hunt was fluid. The rhythm of farming is fixed. Sowing must happen at the right moment. Harvesting must happen before the first rain. This necessity drove the development of the first calendar systems, tied to the slow, predictable cycle of the stars and the seasons. Time was no longer just the immediate present. It was a structure that had to be measured, managed, and obeyed. The domestication of the mind was as important as the domestication of the seed. The farmer had to become disciplined, forward-thinking, and submit to the quiet tyranny of the annual cycle. The hunter worked hard and rested. The farmer was bound to continuous, repetitive labor. From the Fertile Crescent, the knowledge of cultivation, the idea of agriculture, along with the domesticated seeds and animals, began its slow, quiet march across the globe. It did not travel quickly. The process of diffusion was slow, averaging about 1 kilometer per year across Europe. This movement was carried by small groups of migrating farmers, or simply by the quiet exchange of seeds and ideas from one adjacent group to the next. As agriculture spread, it forced a final quiet choice upon all remaining hunter-gatherers: adapt or retreat. The farmer, with their higher population density, their fixed base, and their large, stored surplus, inevitably had an advantage over the nomadic hunter. The forests and open lands that sustained the hunter were slowly and irreversibly cleared for the field. Neolithic revolution was a one-way door. Once a society committed to the stability and predictability of the seed, they could never truly go back. The knowledge of the wild, the intimate, profound, diverse knowledge of the Mesolithic began to atrophy, replaced by the deep, focused knowledge of one field, one crop, one animal. As the final lingering scent of wild wood smoke gives way to the heavier, permanent smell of manure and stored grain, we are left with the immense magnitude of the choice our ancestors made. They traded freedom for stability, diversity for predictability, and the open horizon for the quiet, rooted permanence of the village. Let the sound of the grinding stone now soothe you, the slow, rhythmic whir and scrape of the quern, turning hard grain into soft flour. This sound is the ultimate expression of the Neolithic life, the quiet, ceaseless labor that fuels the beginning of civilization. You are anchored to the earth, surrounded by the promise of the seed, resting in the quiet cradle of the first harvest. Let the dry, fixed earth of the early Neolithic village recede, and feel a new, dense atmosphere settle around you. We are moving eastward and south, deep into the heart of Mesopotamia, the land nestled between the great, slow-moving rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The time is transitioning from the Neolithic stability to the Bronze Age acceleration. Roughly from 4000 BCE to 2500 BCE, this is the moment where the quiet rhythm of farming gave birth to the clamor and complexity of the city. We are witnessing the birth of civilization itself in the ancient land of Sumer. This land is a difficult paradise. It is flat, hot, and largely devoid of stone or timber. It is an alluvial plain built over millennia by the silt dropped by the two rivers. This means the soil is incredibly fertile, but the landscape is hostile. Life here is not possible without massive, organized human effort. The key elements are captured in our subtitle: mud, water, and starlight. Mud, the single defining material of Sumer. No stone for temples, no timber for homes. Everything must be built from the dense, heavy clay of the riverbanks. Water, the lifeblood and the great threat. The rivers bring fertility, but also unpredictable, violent floods. Starlight, the intense, unpolluted night sky that compelled the Sumerians to organize time, space, and their spiritual beliefs. The defining sound of Sumer is the hiss and bubble of the water, the constant, low sound of irrigation canals filling, draining, and being dug. The necessity of managing the water led to the necessity of order. No single family or village could control the rivers or build the massive canals required. It demanded a massive, coordinated effort, the first instance of true, large-scale social organization driven by the very land itself. Walk with us through the early city of Uruk or Ur. You are surrounded by walls, homes, and temples all built from the same material, sun-dried mud brick. The process of making mud bricks is the slow, silent engine of Sumerian construction. The raw, heavy clay must be dug from the riverbank, mixed with chopped reed or straw to bind it, poured into rectangular wooden molds, and left to bake slowly under the fierce Mesopotamian sun. The sound of this process is immensely monotonous, the slow, sucking squelch as feet tread the heavy clay mixture. The gentle, rhythmic slap as the soft mud is dropped into the mold. The profound silence as the bricks dry, stacked in enormous piles, absorbing the heat. Everything is temporary, yet rebuilt endlessly. Unlike the stone monuments of Egypt, the Sumerian city is an organism of constant decay and renewal. The mud brick walls crumble under the relentless wind, rain, and heat. Every century, the walls must be torn down and new ones erected on the flattened debris of the old. This constant process of destruction and rebuilding created the tells, the artificial hills upon which the cities stand. Silently raising the living from the dead, the city is a geometric maze of tall, windowless mud brick houses, packed close for mutual protection from the sun and sandstorms. The narrow, winding alleys are the arteries of the city, shaded and cool. The air is heavy with the smell of dust, spices. And the nearby river Dot, the highest structure, is the ziggurat, the massive step temple tower, built of baked, kill-fired bricks in the core for permanence. The ziggurat is the symbolic mountain in a flat land, reaching up to the starlight, a testament to the belief that the gods dwelled in the heights. The construction of the ziggurat was a generational commitment, a silent, slow prayer in the form of architecture in the bustling, complex social life of the Sumerian city. The need for trust, accounting, and identity was paramount. This led to the creation of one of the most elegant and intimate inventions of the age, the cylinder seal. Imagine a small cylinder, often made of soft stone like hematite or steatite, no larger than a thumb. Its entire surface is intricately carved with a reversed image, a mythic scene, a stylized animal, or a portrait of the owner. The seal was worn on a string around the neck or wrist. When a transaction was finalized, a jar sealed, or a tablet authenticated, the owner would simply roll the cylinder over the damp clay. The resulting impression was an instantly recognizable, legal signature. The sound associated with this is the soft, satisfying roll and release of the seal against the wet clay. It is a quiet, final sound, the sound of guarantee. The cylinder seal represents the complexity of Sumerian society. It means that private property existed. They needed a way to prove ownership of goods. Trade was complex. Goods needed to be sealed and their contents verified across long distances. Individual identity was important. Each seal was unique, a quiet badge of social standing and personal signature. The seals also provide a silent, visual library of the Sumerian mythology, the gods and demons, the heroes and composite beasts. They are tiny, portable monuments reflecting the deep, shared spiritual narrative that bound the citizens together under the authority of the temple. The single most consequential achievement of Sumer was not architecture or agriculture, but the invention of writing. The origin of writing is not poetic. It is economic. It arose from the simple, quiet necessity of counting grain, tracking livestock, and recording temple offerings. Initially, Sumerians used clay tokens of various shapes to represent commodities. One token for one jar of oil, another for one sheep. But as trade expanded, this became too cumbersome. Around 3200 BCE, the first system of true writing emerged, cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped. Imagine the scribe, the most important specialist in the city, sitting quietly in a temple corner. They hold a small, soft, pillow-shaped tablet of wet clay and a stylus or reed cut to a wedge-shaped point. The sound of writing is the quick, decisive press and lift of the reed pen into the damp clay. It is a quiet, continuous click, click, click. As the scribe rapidly presses the wedge shapes representing syllables, words, or numbers into the surface, this sound is the birth of documentation. The power of cuneiform is immense. Silent and abstract, it externalizes memory. Knowledge is no longer dependent on a single human mind. It can be stored, accessed, and transported. It creates bureaucracy. Complex government, tax collection, and law codes are now possible. The vast archives of clay tablets are the quiet evidence of Sumer's complex, unseen administrative structure. The earliest texts are not epic poems. They are ledgers and lists, The power of the written word is that it brings fixed order to the chaotic flow of goods and wealth. The greatest Sumerian innovation was the silent, absolute authority of the recorded number. Sumer. IAN society was fundamentally organized by its deep, intense relationship with the heavens. The vast, clear Mesopotamian night sky was not just beautiful. It was the cosmic clock and the divine calendar. Their religious and scientific mind was driven by an obsession with cycles and patterns. They believed the will of the gods was revealed in the predictable, slow movements of the stars, planets, and the moon. This obsessive observation led to profound, silent achievements. Mathematics, sexagesimal system. The Sumerians invented the base 60 counting system, sexagesimal. Why 60? It is a number easily divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This system was perfectly suited for dividing circles, 360 degrees, and tracking time, 60 seconds, 60 minutes. We still use this quiet, ancient system every time we look at a clock or measure an angle. The calendar. They developed the lunar calendar, based on the cycles of the moon, requiring complex mathematical corrections, intercalary months, to keep it aligned with the solar agricultural year. The long, patient hours of observing the night sky, making tables of data, and making precise calculations. This was the core of Sumerian science. Astronomy. The constant, silent observation of the planet's movements. They identified the primary constellations and gave them the names and mythological meaning that would later travel to Greece and become the basis of Western astrology and Kruntu. Astronomy. The Sumerian mind was one of order and division. They were obsessed with taking the chaotic reality of the rivers and the heavens and dividing it into measurable, manageable, predictable units. This silent, abstract work, the ability to conceive of numbers and time as separate from the physical objects they describe, is the very core of their genius. As the city-states, like Uruk, Kish, Lagash, grew in wealth and population, the informal social control of the Neolithic village broke down. The sheer density of people, the wealth disparities, and the complexity of trade required an external, written authority, law. The primary authority in Sumer was the temple, Ina, which served as the economic, spiritual, and administrative center. The initial ruler was often a priest-king, whose authority flowed from the god of the city, for example, Nana the moon god in Ur. But as conflicts arose over land and water rights, the need for a secular fixed law code emerged. The first known legal code, dating back to around 2100 BCE, is the Code of Ur-Nama. Imagine the scene in the city square as the code is being read. The authority is no longer just the spoken word of the elder or the priest. It is the silent, fixed authority of the written word. The law is clear, precise, and sets precedents for everything from inheritance and water usage to the punishment for assault. It is a quiet, powerful constraint on human freedom, the necessity of living peacefully in a dense, communal space. The Sumerian governance system required immense quiet coordination, tax collection, often paid in grain, the maintenance of the massive canal networks, which required yearly cleaning, and the organization of the labor force. The entire infrastructure of the first civilization was held together by an invisible, abstract grid of rules and numbers, all recorded on clay tablets. The age of Sumer was long, but not eternal. The complexity that sustained it eventually contributed to its quiet, slow decline. The fundamental threat was environmental salinization. The vast irrigation networks that made the desert fertile required continuous, careful drainage. As the water sat on the flat, intensely hot plain, it evaporated, leaving behind trace minerals and salts. Over centuries of intense irrigation, the salt levels in the topsoil slowly climbed, making the land less and less productive. The evidence is in the silent records of the clay tablets. The early texts show that farmers grew the salt-sensitive wheat. Later texts show a gradual forced shift to the more salt-tolerant barley. Eventually, even barley yields dropped catastrophically. The land was quietly poisoning itself. The city-states also fought constantly amongst themselves over the one thing that mattered most: water rights and control of the upstream canals. The constant, localized warfare drained the economy and weakened the central authority. Around 2000 BCE, the region fell under the influence of neighboring empires, the Akkadians, then the Babylonians. The Sumerian people did not vanish. Their culture, language, religion, and systems of governance were simply assimilated by the conquering groups. The great Sumerian civilization ended not with a bang, but with a quiet ecological collapse and a silent absorption of its ideas. They left behind the greatest legacy of the ancient world: the idea of the city, the concept of law, the structure of time, and the invention of writing. As the final image of Sumer fades, we are left with the scent of dried mud, the vast silence of the desert night, and the slow, rhythmic drip of the water from the canals, the fundamental forces that gave birth to the oldest cities and established the permanent rules of civilized life. Allow the dry, intense heat of Mesopotamia to soften. We are shifting westward, across the desert, to a civilization defined not by conflict with its environment, but by perfect harmony with a single, colossal feature: the River Nile. The time is approximately 3100 BCE. The dawn of dynastic Egypt, stretching through the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. The name of the land, Kemet, means the Black Land, referring to the dark, rich, life-giving silt brought by the annual flood, while Sumer was a civilization of mud and anxiety due to the unpredictable nature of the Tigris and Euphrates. Egypt was a civilization of water and certainty. The Nile was not just a river. It was the axis of existence, the single predictable lifeline that structured every moment of Egyptian life. From agriculture to religion, the defining sound of this chapter is the slow, constant flow of the Nile itself, a deep, resonant hush that underpins all other activities. The great mystery of Egypt is its stability. Why did this civilization endure, largely unchanged in its core beliefs and structures, for 3,000 years? The answer lies in the river's rhythm. The Nile's annual flooding, or the inundation, Akhet, was so regular that the ancient Egyptians based their entire calendar and worldview upon it. Every year, from roughly July to October, the river swelled. Fed by the monsoon rains far away in the Ethiopian highlands, the water did not rush violently, but rose slowly, gently spreading across the valley banks, saturating the parched soil. Then, just as predictably, the water receded, leaving behind a thick, black, incredibly fertile layer of silt, the Black Land, perfectly prepared for planting. This predictability allowed the Egyptian mind to believe in order. Matt, if the river could always return and always sustain, then life, death, and the cosmic order were also cyclical, orderly, and eternal. This certainty freed the Egyptian mind from the chaotic anxiety that plagued other early civilizations. The three seasons. The quiet routine life along the Nile was defined by three predictable seasons, each demanding a specific repetitive labor, giving life its slow, meditative rhythm. 1. Akhet, the inundation. July-October, the season of rest and construction. The fields are underwater, unusable for farming. This is the period when the vast majority of the population, the peasant farmers, were conscripted for labor on the great national projects: temple construction, quarrying, and most famously the pyramids. The sounds of this season are not agricultural, but industrial: the steady low thud of mallets against copper chisels, the rhythmic chanting of thousands of workers dragging immense stone blocks over oiled sledges, and the constant scrape of stone on stone. It is a slow, methodical effort of building for eternity. 2. Pare, the growing season. October, February. As the water receded, the silt-rich land was immediately ready for planting. The labor is swift and efficient. The farmer often didn't need to plow deeply. The soil was soft and ready. The sounds are the soft swish of the seed being sown, the gentle bleating of sheep or goats being driven over the fields to trample the seed into the soil, and the quiet hush of the growing barley and wheat. 3. Shemu, the harvest season. February, June, the climax of the year. The sound here is the dry sizzle of the scythe, a wooden handle inset with sharp flint or copper blades, cutting the ripe stalks. This is intense, communal, exhausting work done under the hot sun. The harvest is then taken to the threshing floor, where the heavy oxen slowly circle, trampling the grain, the air filled with the quiet, continuous chaff and dust. This is the moment of greatest vulnerability, as a poor harvest meant starvation. Hence the enormous effort put into storage. This triple rhythm: water, growth, harvest was the quiet, unchanging engine of the Egyptian state, repeating with comforting certainty for 3,000 years. 3. The sun and the soul, the quest for eternity. Stability of the Nile directly fueled the Egyptian obsession with the concept of eternity, Jed, and the afterlife. If life on earth was orderly and certain, then the transition to the next life could also be managed and guaranteed. The central religious figure is the sun god, Ra, who follows the ultimate predictable cycle, rising in the east, birth life, traveling across the sky, and dying in the west, death, afterlife, only to be reborn again the next morning. The Egyptian believed the human soul, K-N-Bay, was also subject to this cycle. To ensure rebirth, the physical body had to be preserved, a process we call mummification. Imagine the silent, meticulous work of the embalmers in the Wabat, purification place, often conducted over 70 days. The sounds are hushed, reverent. The quiet scraping of the tools used to remove the internal organs, the soft rustle of the body, being packed with natron salt to dry it out, the meticulous, patient wrapping of the body in hundreds of yards of linen bandage, often accompanied by the quiet, droning recitation of prayers and spells. Every bandage, every amulet tucked into the folds, every step was a slow, deliberate ritual to protect the deceased and guide their soul to eternal rebirth. This entire industry, this vast expenditure of labor, wealth, and time on the dead was a silent testament to their absolute confidence in the predictable promise of the afterlife. They built their greatest monuments not for the living, but for the eternal continuation of their kings and their own souls. 4. The hieroglyphs, the sacred, quiet script. While the Sumerians developed writing for accounting, the Egyptians developed hieroglyphs for sacred communication and permanence. The word itself means sacred carving. Hieroglyphs were not intended for quick ledgers on clay. They were carved into the enduring stone of tombs, temples, and obelisks, meant to last for all eternity. Imagine a highly skilled craftsman in the tomb chamber, working by the dim, flickering light of an oil lamp, carving the wall. The sound is the delicate, patient tap-tap, tap of the chisel against the soft limestone, slowly rendering the beautiful, stylized images of birds, baskets, and reeds. The artist works in profound silence, their craft being a quiet act of devotion to the word. The script itself is a quiet, visual marvel, phonetic. The signs represent sounds, like our alphabet. Ideographic. The signs represent whole concepts, like the sun or a seated god. Determinative. Signs placed at the end of a word to clarify its meaning, for example, a tiny drawing of a person to indicate the previous word was a name. The complexity of the system created a powerful, closed class of scribes. The scribe was the quiet engine of the state, the only one who could read the decrees, track the taxes, and manage the grain silos. The scribe's tools, a palette, reed pens, And ink blocks, black and red, were their badge of office. A quiet symbol of power transcending the strength of the soldier or the toil of the farmer. The temple walls and the tomb chambers are the vast, silent libraries of Egypt. Their history and belief system carved in permanent, beautiful detail. Intended to speak to the gods for all time. The Great Stone Mountain, the Pyramids' silence, the Pyramids of Giza, especially the Great Pyramid of Khufu, are the ultimate expression of the Egyptian faith in order and eternity. They are not just tombs. They are massive, quiet engines of collective labor and engineering built during the Old Kingdom, c. 2500 BCE. Imagine the scene at the quarry near the Nile. The sound is the rhythmic, collective grunt of thousands of men using ropes and levers to move blocks weighing many tons. There is no mystery about how they were built. It was the mystery of social organization and unified national purpose. The construction itself was a precise, quiet endeavor. Alignment. The pyramids are aligned with near-perfect cardinal accuracy, north, south, east, west, requiring incredibly precise astronomical observation. The patient work of watching the rising and setting of stars, like the circumpolar mizar, to establish true north. Mathematics. The structure embodies deep mathematical concepts, including the ratio of pi, dollar, and the golden ratio, dollar, phi dollar. Built not with abstract equations but with precise ropes, measurements, and a deep, shared understanding of geometry. The pyramids represent the single greatest expenditure of national wealth and labor in the ancient world, all dedicated to ensuring the smooth transition of one man, the pharaoh, the great house, into the next life. Because the pharaoh was the divine link between man and the eternal order, Mat. The survival of the state depended on the perfection of his tomb. Standing beside the Great Pyramid, the silence is immense. The millions of individual blocks are a testament to the quiet, ceaseless work of countless generations. A civilization that literally moved mountains not for defense or economy, but for spiritual permanence. The Valley of the Kings, the hidden secrets after the Old Kingdom. The practice of building massive visible pyramids was replaced by the need for secrecy. The wealth contained in the tombs became too tempting for robbers, leading to the creation of the Valley of the Kings during the New Kingdom, c. 1500 BCE. This period marks a shift from building for visibility to building for concealment. The valley is a narrow, desolate gorge of baked limestone in the west bank of Thebes. The tombs are not raised. They are excavated deep into the bedrock tunnels and chambers carved and decorated with astonishing beauty. Descending into the earth. Imagine the work, the quiet chipping of the workers carving the tomb deep into the stone. The hushed conversations of the artists decorating the walls with scenes from the Book of the Dead, a detailed, visual guide to navigating the perils of the underworld. The entire process was conducted in intense secrecy. The builders often housed in a separate, isolated village, Der el Medina, to prevent the location of the tomb from ever becoming common knowledge. The silence of the Valley of the Kings is profound. It holds the secret of the pharaohs, each tomb an inverted pyramid, a path descending into the darkness toward the eventual promise of the sun god's eternal return. The elaborate magic, the spells painted on the walls, and the incredible material wealth placed within the tombs were all designed for a silent, subterranean journey to the afterlife. The silent endurance of Math's story of ancient Egypt is a story of quiet, powerful endurance through periods of instability, the intermediate periods, invasions, the Hyksos, and internal strife. The core structure of Egyptian life, the predictability of the Nile, the belief in Ma'at, cosmic order, and the devotion to the pharaoh always snapped back into place. The civilization endured because its worldview was perfectly adapted to its unique geography. The Egyptian civilization did not die. It slowly faded, its power waning. but its culture and memory persisted, silently influencing the Greeks, the Romans, and ultimately the modern world. The quiet, unchanging symbols of Egypt remain: the Eye of Horus, the Ankh, the symbol of life, and the serene, eternal gaze of the Sphinx. These are the visual vocabulary of a people who believed that life was a perfect, predictable cycle, and that death was merely a doorway to the eternal river. As the final images of the Nile drift through your mind, let the quiet certainty of the annual cycle soothe you: the slow, steady rise of the water, the gentle spread of the fertile silt, the patient wait for the sun to ripen the grain. You are anchored by the rhythm of the most predictable, longest-lasting civilization the world has ever known. Resting in the peaceful confidence of the eternal river, allow the profound certainty of the Nile to recede. We are moving eastward again, across the Arabian Sea, to a civilization that remains perhaps the most enigmatic and least understood of the ancient world: the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization. The time is the height of its flourishing, approximately 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE, contemporaneous with the Old Kingdom of Egypt and the height of Sumer. The location is the vast, fertile plain fed by the Indus River and its tributaries, spanning modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. Unlike the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, which left behind massive monuments and detailed written histories, the Indus Valley civilization is a civilization of whispers and quiet order. It speaks to us through its silence, its meticulous planning, and its apparent lack of centralized, visible power. The defining sound of this chapter is the gentle, persistent trickle of moving water, not the turbulent flood of the Tigris, nor the rhythmic rise of the Nile, but the regulated, controlled flow of domestic water within the city. The great mystery of Harappa is the absence of obvious struggle. In a world defined by the constant threat of war and the tyranny of despotic kings, the Indus cities seem to have been characterized by an almost utopian sense of quiet, functional uniformity, and peace. We are entering the city of Mohenjo-Daro, meaning Mound of the Dead, or Harappa. The first impression is not of chaos, but of meticulous, reasoned order. The city is built on a precise grid plan, laid out with mathematical precision before the first brick was set. The streets are broad, straight, and run in perfect alignment, intersecting at right angles, a level of urban planning that would not be seen again in the world until the Roman Empire. Millennia later, imagine the city planners a body of silent, organized thinkers walking the dusty plain with ropes and measuring sticks, charting the course of the future streets. The sheer forethought and coordination required for this level of uniformity across multiple cities like Lothal and Dalavira is staggering. It speaks to a powerful, centralized authority, yet one that did not express itself through massive statues or palaces. The primary building material is not mud brick left to dry in the sun, but kill-fired, standardized brick. This is a profound difference. Making fired brick required immense labor, digging and processing the clay, and, critically, feeding the kilns with vast quantities of wood over long periods to achieve the necessary heat. The sound of the Harappan city is the sound of the kill, the low, continuous roar of the fire, and the slow clack of perfectly uniform bricks being stacked. Every brick in the city is almost exactly the same size and dimension, often in the ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, demonstrating a systematic, centralized quality control across thousands of square miles. The uniformity is not a sign of poverty, but of quiet, absolute efficiency. The most astonishing and quiet innovation of the Harappan cities is their unparalleled sanitation and water management. In Mohenjo-Daro, almost every house, not just the houses of the elite, had access to a private well for clean water and its own bathing area and toilet. Imagine the profound difference this made to daily life. The sound of the Harappan morning is the quiet splash of water drawn from the well, the gentle pouring of water over the body in the dedicated washroom. It speaks to a society that placed an enormous premium on public health and personal hygiene. The genius, however, lies in the drainage system. Beneath the main streets run elaborate, concealed systems of covered drains, built with perfectly joined, baked brick. These drains carried the sewage and wastewater away from the living spaces and out of the city. The construction of this system required constant, meticulous maintenance. The drainage channels had manholes for inspection and cleaning. The entire city was a subtle, silent hydro-engineering marvel that the noise of this infrastructure is its absence. The streets are clean, the air is dry, and the water flows quietly beneath the paving stones. The quiet organization of the drainage system is a symbol of the entire Harappan ethos, order that is functional, necessary, and unseen. They focused their monumental efforts not on building to the sky, but on building into the earth for the collective good. One of the deepest mysteries of the Harappan civilization is the absence of massive, visible power structures. No colossal temples. Unlike Sumer, there are no enormous ziggurats dominating the skyline. The largest structures are the citadel, a raised area used for public works, like the great bath and granaries and the massive fortifications. But these seem to serve communal, administrative functions, not royal residence. No monumental tombs. Unlike Egypt, no colossal tombs filled with gold and the bodies of kings have been found. The burials are simple, egalitarian, and often contain very few goods. No warrior class. There's a remarkable lack of weapons in the archaeological record. The tools found are for construction and farming, not for large-scale warfare. This suggests a different model of governance. The authority that engineered the cities and standardized the bricks seems to have been administrative, theocratic, perhaps a council of wise elders or priests focused on trade, public works, and religious ritual, like the symbolic use of the Great Bath. Trade-based. Their wealth was derived from extensive trade, evidenced by Harappan seals found in Mesopotamia. And governance may have been focused on stabilizing commerce, silent and consensus-driven. The power was expressed not in the roar of a king's army, but in the quiet consensus required to maintain the standardization of bricks, weights, and measures across an area larger than Western Europe. The only figures that might hint at authority are the small, exquisite stone statues like the famous priest king. But this figure, small and meditative, contrasts sharply with the massive imposing statues of Egyptian pharaohs. He is a whisper of authority, not a shout. The most poignant mystery is the Indus script. Thousands of examples of this script have been found, almost exclusively carved onto small, square steatite seals, similar to the cylinder seals of Mesopotamia, but flat. The script appears in short inscriptions, typically 4 or 5 signs long. Accompanying an image of an animal, the unicorn-like figure is the most common. Imagine the small, precious seal pressed into the soft clay tag used to mark bundled goods. The sound of this is the quiet, final imprint of the script. The script has never been definitively deciphered. This is due to 3 factors: lack of a Rosetta Stone. No bilingual text has been found linking the script to a known language. Short inscriptions. The short length suggests they may be names, titles, or trade labels, not long narratives, making decoding difficult. The silent language. The script may be fundamentally logographic or partially phonetic, but its meaning remains locked within the ancient clay. These seals were clearly integral to the Indus economic system, verifying the origin and contents of trade goods traveling to far-off lands like Sumer. The Harappan civilization was communicating, trading, and recording, but that communication remains permanently silent to us. The script is a constant, quiet reminder that a vast, ordered civilization lived, worked, and thought, yet its voice is lost. The economy of the Indus was driven by trade and craftsmanship. The uniformity of the cities was mirrored by the uniformity of their weights and measures. Throughout the Harappan world, standardized cube-shaped weights made of chert or agate have been found, following a precise binary system: 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 units. This standardization allowed for seamless, quiet trade without constant argument or distrust. Imagine the Harappan bazaar. The sounds are not the chaotic shouts of aggressive merchants, but the quiet, steady clink of weights being balanced on a scale. The goods being traded tell a story of regional specialization and connectivity. Jewelry, carnelian beads, gold, and lapis lazuli were crafted in specialized workshops. The sound is the delicate tap of the bead drill, and the slow polish of the precious stones. Metals, copper and bronze were worked, though never on the scale needed for mass weaponry. Tools and vessels were the focus. Cotton, the Indus Valley, was one of the first places in the world to cultivate and weave cotton. The sound of the textile industry is the rhythmic, soothing click and clack of the loom, a sound of domestic, industrial calm. The Harappan economy was a quiet machine of efficiency, focused on utility, quality, and peaceful exchange rather than military conquest. The great wealth of the civilization was invested not in monuments to ego, but in the invisible infrastructure that benefited the collective. The most profound mystery of Harappa is its end. The great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa did not fall to a sudden dramatic invasion. They experienced a slow, quiet, localized decline around 1900 BCE. The theory of a catastrophic Aryan invasion, the massacre layer, has been largely dismissed by modern archaeology. Instead, the evidence points to a combination of quiet, relentless factors: environmental stress, the slow, gradual shift in the monsoon patterns, and the drying up of the Gagar-Hakra river system, a massive parallel to the Indus, put immense pressure on agriculture. River instability. The Indus itself shifted its course in several key areas, abandoning cities and ruining irrigation systems. The sound of the river's slow, unpredictable movement was the sound of ecological crisis. Internal decentralization. The economic and organizational structure seems to have slowly frayed. The quality of the construction declined, new buildings were shoddy, drainage systems were neglected, and standardization of bricks and weights was abandoned. The cities were not destroyed in a single moment. They were gently suffocated by environmental change and internal decay. People did not die off en masse. They moved. They abandoned the vast planned cities and migrated eastward and southward into smaller, less centralized rural settlements. The massive unified order of the Indus simply dissolved into smaller, regional cultures. The great silence of the Indus is the silence of an unprecedented collapse, a vast, advanced and peaceful civilization that simply vanished from the archaeological record as a unified entity, leaving behind only the meticulously planned ruins and the quiet, unread language of its seals. As the final images of the Indus drift through your mind, imagine the perfectly aligned, fire-baked bricks of a deserted street. Hear the last trickle of water running down a clean-covered drain. The quiet order of Harappa is an eternal reminder that the greatest achievements of humanity can be found not in the roar of war or the monument to the individual, but in the profound, quiet, and necessary cooperation of a community built for health, trade, and peace. Settle deep into the quiet now, and let us approach a moment in history that stands as a stark, chilling counterpoint to the rise of civilization, the Bronze Age collapse. The time is approximately 1200 BCE. We are looking at a vast, interconnected world spanning from Mycenaean Greece, through the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, across the Levant, and down to Egypt's New Kingdom. This world was a dense, sophisticated bronze web, This web was defined by complexity and reliance, shared technology. All these powers relied on bronze, an alloy of copper and scarce tin, which required vast, intricate trade routes reaching from Britain to Afghanistan. Shared diplomacy. Kings corresponded using Babylonian cuneiform tablets, calling each other brother. Shared prosperity. Palaces were centers of wealth, managing trade, storing massive surpluses, and employing specialized craftspeople in every field. The sounds of this prosperous world were the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, shaping bronze armor, the rhythmic splash of trading ships moving vast quantities of goods, and the busy hum of palace bureaucracy. It was a world of seemingly unstoppable order. The great mystery is this: how did an entire interconnected system, robust and sophisticated for centuries, collapse almost simultaneously within the span of 50 years? The answer is not a single event, but a rapid, fatal interaction of subtle forces, leading to an age of profound, terrifying silence. The Bronze Age collapse was characterized by a simplification of life in the Mediterranean heartland. But in the cooler, damper north, it brought about a period of profound, quiet autonomy. With the collapse of the Mycenaean and Mesopotamian trade networks, the necessity of importing bronze, which required difficult, long-distance trade for tin, vanished. The isolated communities were forced to look inward, to the abundant resources of their own forests and soil. The defining characteristic of this new world is the deep woods. The forests, once managed and cleared in patches, now surged back in the absence of centralized control, reclaiming the fields and pathways. The dominant sound of this era is the profound, continuous hush of the forest canopy, punctuated by the slow, heavy thud of wood being split, the sound of a civilization rebuilding itself. Root by root, log by log. The great mystery of the Iron Age North is how these seemingly barbaric cultures, often seen as marginal by the Mediterranean powers, were able to develop a resilience and self-sufficiency that would eventually challenge the great empires of the South. The answer lies in the silent power of a single, humble material, iron. The shift from bronze to iron was not a choice of superiority, but of availability. Bronze was precious. Iron was ubiquitous. Iron ore is simply rust, the oxide of iron, which is found everywhere on the planet. It is abundant in the form of bog iron, soft, porous ore deposited in marshes, and hematite, found in sedimentary rocks. Imagine the early Iron Age prospector, a villager searching the local stream beds and marshes. The sound of this is the squelch of boots in the wet bog and the quiet clinking of stones as they search for the telltale reddish-brown lumps of ore. This discovery meant an end to the complex trade diplomacy required for bronze. The self-sufficient village, tucked deep in the woods, could now access the core material for its tools entirely locally. This single fact empowered the rural community and decentralized technology. The process of turning this humble, rusty rock into usable metal is a masterpiece of quiet, patient human engineering, smelting in the bloomery. The bloomery. This was a simple, short furnace built of local clay and stone, often dug into the side of a hill for insulation. The heat and the bellows. The furnace was packed with alternating layers of charcoal made from the abundant wood and iron ore. Crucially, it required a massive continuous supply of oxygen, pumped in manually with bellows. The sound of the bloomery is the rhythmic, deep whoosh and pant of the bellows, a sound of continuous, heavy labor lasting for many hours. The bloom. Unlike bronze, iron does not fully liquefy at this temperature. Instead, it forms a spongy solid mass of iron and slag called a bloom. The bloomery furnace, glowing intensely in the deep woods, was the new, quiet heart of the Iron Age village. This local demanding process gave rise to the new, essential craftsman, the blacksmith. The blacksmith is the most important figure in the Iron Age village. They are the guardians of the new technology, the quiet source of power and prosperity. The sound of the Iron Age is the monotonous, rhythmic clang of the hammer on the anvil. It is a sound that carries far through the forest, a sound of purpose, heat, and stability. The process of forging the bloom into usable tools is the meditation of the smith. Consolidation. The spongy bloom must be repeatedly heated and pounded to force out the trapped slag, turning the rough iron into a dense, strong metal. Shaping. The hot metal is then shaped into tools. The first focus is not on swords, but on utility. The transformative power of iron lies in the iron axe and the iron plowshare. The iron axe. This tool was revolutionary. The older bronze axe dulled quickly and was easily damaged. The iron axe allowed the clearing of the deep European forests with an unprecedented efficiency. The sound of the iron axe biting into the tough trunk of an oak tree is the sound of the rapid, silent expansion of the agricultural frontier. The iron plowshare, attaching an iron tip to the wooden plow, allowed the farmer to break the heavy, clay-rich soils of northern Europe, soils that the lighter wooden or bronze plows could not touch. This opened up vast new areas for cultivation, leading to an increase in food surplus that sustained the growing population. The work of the blacksmith, therefore, drove the growth of the community. They were the key to farming, carpentry, and eventually, defense. The local smith replaced the imported commodity as the source of local power. The stability and increased yield provided by iron tools allowed the small, scattered hamlets of the Dark Age to grow and consolidate. They began to build larger, more permanent settlements, often for defense, known as hillforts or oppida in the later Celtic world. Imagine the enormous, collective effort required to build a hillfort. These were not stone structures like the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, but massive defensive works built entirely from the abundant resources of the woods and earth. The ramparts, huge earthworks and ditches dug into the hillside. The sound of the iron shovel scraping the earth. The palisades, timber walls constructed from thousands of massive logs. The sound of the iron saw grinding and the axe thudding. The hillfort was a refuge and a central kajia hub, a place where trade routes converged, where seasonal markets were held, and where the community could retreat in times of conflict. The view from the top of the rampart, looking out over the conquered, cleared forest, gave the inhabitants a sense of quiet mastery over their environment. These settlements were centers of local power, led not by a distant, divine king, but by local chieftains or warrior elites, whose authority was earned through success in local conflicts and their ability to organize the collective labor needed for defense. The focus of the Iron Age North was intensely localized and decentralized. The religious and spiritual life of the Iron Age North remains one of the most compelling mysteries, revealed not in grand temples, but in the dark, silent depths of the peat bogs. Peat bogs are natural wetlands that are highly acidic and low in oxygen, creating a perfect natural preservation environment. These bogs were seen as liminal spaces, gateways to the spirit world. Here, in the cold, silent bog, we find the bog bodies, perfectly preserved remains of men and women, often showing signs of ritual death, a slit throat, a hanging cord, or a sharp blow to the head before being carefully placed in the bog. Imagine the ritual, the quiet, terrifying procession to the bog edge, the solemn act of sacrifice. The sound is the soft, wet plunge as the body is released into the dark, still water. Why were they placed there? Sacrifice to the earth, perhaps offerings to the mother goddess or the spirits of the bog in times of famine or crisis, seeking to guarantee the fertility of the next harvest. Judicial execution, perhaps criminals or traitors whose bodies were ritually disgraced and handed over to the earth. Denied a proper honoring burial, the bog bodies are a silent, profound window into the religious worldview of the Iron Age, a world governed not by the abstract gods of the Mediterranean, but by the immediate, powerful, and often terrifying spirits of the earth, the forest, and the water. The silence of the bog is a sacred, heavy silence, holding secrets of ancient belief. The European Iron Age is most closely associated with the Celts, Gaelic, Gallic, or Brythonic peoples. This was not a unified empire, but a vast, interconnected cultural sphere stretching from Ireland to Turkey, bound together not by a common king, but by language, art, and shared tradition. The hallmark of Celtic society was specialization and artistry. The Druids. The Druids were the elite intellectual class: priests, judges, teachers, and historians. They were the silent keepers of knowledge, maintaining vast bodies of religious and historical tradition that were never written down. The knowledge remained oral, passed only from master to student, a deliberate choice that gave them immense, quiet power. The sound of the Druid is the low, rhythmic recitation of ancient laws and myths in the deep forest grove. Art. Latin style. Celtic artists transformed the raw material of iron and gold into stunning, abstract art coils, spirals, and zoomorphic designs applied to shields, armor, and jewelry. The sound is the delicate tap of the goldsmith's hammer, creating objects that were expressions of abstract, complex tribal identity. The Celts were a decentralized people, focused on local tribal identity and warrior ethos, often fighting among themselves. Their strength lay in their adaptability and their deep connection to the land and the forest. A self-sufficient world that required no import of knowledge or material from the struggling Mediterranean. The Iron Age North, built on the humble foundations of ore and charcoal, grew in power and confidence. This growth eventually brought them into inevitable catastrophic contact with the new, emerging power of the Mediterranean Rome. The famous conflicts like Vercingetorix facing Caesar, or the later expansion of the Germanic tribes, were the clash between the Mediterranean's highly centralized, disciplined, and literate power and the North's decentralized, deeply rooted, and fiercely independent tribal power. The final lasting legacy of the Iron Age is the taming of the wilderness. The iron axe had allowed the widespread clearance of the deep forests. The iron plow had tied the population to the permanent settlement. The New World, built from the grassroots up, was ready to support the complex, dense populations that would eventually form the modern nations of Europe. The roots of the New World were forged in the silent chaos of the Bronze Age collapse, not through the actions of kings, but through the humble, repetitive labor of the local blacksmith and the farmer. As the final images of the Iron Age drift, feel the weight and solidity of the metal. Hear the final powerful clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoing through the newly cleared forest. The old world of precious bronze is gone, replaced by a tough, practical, and decentralized resilience forged in the deep woods. You are grounded, safe, and sheltered in the quiet strength of the Iron Age. The azure dawn and the birth of inquiry. We move now across the quiet, familiar seas of the Iron Age to the lands of the Mediterranean, specifically the rugged, sun-drenched peninsula of Greece. The time is the Axial Age, roughly 600 BCE to 300 BCE, a period of revolutionary thought that defines what it means to be human. The city that is the focal point of this awakening is Athens. Unlike the vast, centralized empires of the past, Egypt, Persia, ancient Greece was a collection of independent, fiercely competitive city-states, palaeus. Its foundation was not absolute royal power, but a restless, critical, and often noisy curiosity. The defining sound of this chapter is the gentle, rhythmic shush of waves against the Aegean coast, accompanied by the soft rustle of dry olive leaves, the constant, natural soundscape of thought. The great mystery we explore here is the birth of abstract philosophy. Why, in this small corner of the world, did thinkers suddenly begin to ask, not what the gods willed, but why? How? What is the nature of reality? The environment itself fostered this inquiry. The geography mountainous with limited arable land pushed the Greeks toward maritime trade and colonization. This exposure to diverse cultures, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Persians, forced them to compare their myths and beliefs, leading to a crucial, quiet realization. Truth might be universal, not local. This is the moment when thought became secular. The ancient reliance on mythological narrative began to give way to reasoned argument, the quiet, disciplined application of logic to the world. The first sparks of philosophical inquiry did not ignite in Athens, but across the Aegean, in the Greek trading colonies of Ionia, modern-day Turkey. These thinkers, the pre-Socratics, asked the most fundamental question of all: what is the single basic substance, arch, from which the entire world is made? Imagine Thales of Miletus, c. 624 to 546 BCE, often considered the first philosopher. He was not a priest or a king, but a wealthy merchant and mathematician. He stood by the quiet harbor, watching the sea, and came to a profound, simple conclusion. The arch is water. Water is essential to life. It can exist as liquid, solid, or vapor, and it seems to underlie all things. Anaximenes later posited that the arch was air, arguing that rarefaction and condensation of air could form all other substances. Heraclitus declared that the arch was fire and that reality was defined by constant, eternal change. No man ever steps in the same river twice. His philosophy is the sound of the slow, incessant flow of the river. Parmenides countered with the idea of being, that change is an illusion, and true reality is one, timeless and motionless. These were the first quiet intellectual battles waged, not with armies, but with pure logic and reasoned argument. They established the revolutionary idea that the world could be understood through observation and reason, without resorting to divine explanation. This quiet intellectual pursuit was the foundation of all later Western science. The center of philosophical activity eventually shifted to Athens, the crucible of democracy and intellectual freedom. Here, philosophy moved from the nature of the cosmos to the nature of man, ethics, and society. The sound of the Athenian agora, the marketplace, is not the heavy silence of the Hittite palace, but a vibrant cacophony of debate, the rise and fall of voices, the passionate clash of ideas, the constant, low hum of the democratic process. The greatest figure of this transition is Socrates, c. 470 to 399 BCE. Socrates never wrote a book. His philosophy existed purely in dialogue and questioning. He spent his days in the agora, engaging citizens, craftsmen, politicians, and youths in his relentless process of inquiry, the Socratic method. Imagine Socrates, old and barefoot, standing under the hot Athenian sun, asking a politician, "What is justice?" The politician offers a confident definition, and Socrates, with a quiet, devastating series of questions, exposes the internal contradictions and flaws in the definition. The sound of Socrates' philosophy is the quiet, uncomfortable pause after a question, the moment when the interlocutor realizes they do not know what they thought they knew. His core belief was the quiet wisdom. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Socrates' life ended in a quiet, profound act of civil disobedience, accepting the death penalty rather than abandoning his mission of questioning. His execution was the ultimate silent affirmation that the pursuit of truth and virtue was more important than life itself. After Socrates' death, his most brilliant student, Plato, c. 428 to 348 BCE, dedicated his life to preserving his master's memory and building upon his ideas. Plato founded the Academy, located in a quiet grove of olive trees just outside the city walls. This was the first enduring institution of higher learning in the Western world. Plato's philosophy, recorded in his famous dialogues like the Republic, introduced the most mysterious and influential concept in Western thought, the theory of forms. Imagine Plato walking slowly and talking quietly with his students under the shade of the olive trees. He argues that the world we perceive with our senses, the visible world of changing objects, is merely a shadow of a higher, invisible realm, the world of forms. The forms, these are the perfect, eternal, unchangeable blueprints of everything. Perfect justice, perfect beauty, the perfect circle, and the ultimate form, the form of the good. The cave allegory, Plato's most famous quiet story, people trapped in a cave, watching shadows on the wall, believing the shadows are reality. The philosopher is the one who escapes, sees the true light, the forms, and tries to tell the others. Plato's philosophy is the sound of quiet contemplation, the rejection of the noisy, chaotic sensory world in favor of the silent, perfect world of pure mathematical and philosophical ideals. He argued that the ideal society was a meritocracy ruled by wise, quiet philosopher kings, people whose lives were dedicated to the forms. Plato's greatest student, Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, marked the next colossal, quiet shift in the path of thought. After studying at the academy for 2 decades, Aristotle moved back to Athens and founded his own school, the Lyceum. Aristotle's school was famous for its peripatetics, meaning those who walk about. His students would follow him, discussing philosophy as they strolled through the peripatos, covered walkways, of the Lyceum. The sound of Aristotle's teaching is the soft rhythmic scuff of sandals on stone, a constant ambulatory form of inquiry. Aristotle's quiet revolution was his focus on the observable world. He disagreed with Plato's rejection of the physical world, arguing that the forms, the essence of a thing, were not in a separate realm, but were inherent within the thing itself. Logic, the organon. Aristotle formally systematized logic, the rules of valid reasoning. Specifically the syllogism, for example, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This was the creation of the first, quiet, universal tool of thought, the framework for all future critical thinking. Empirical science. He was the first great scientist. He studied, classified, and analyzed everything: zoology, botany, physics, ethics, politics, and rhetoric. His politics was an empirical analysis of 158 city-state constitutions. His sound is the turning of the parchment scroll, the quiet work of vast, organized categorization. Aristotle's philosophy is the path of moderation, the golden mean, the quiet belief that virtue is found not in extremes, but in the balance between 2 vices. For example, courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness. He taught that the highest human good was contemplation, the quiet, fulfilling use of the rational mind. Following the conquests of Alexander the Great, Aristotle's most famous non-philosophical student, the Greek world expanded into the Hellenistic age. Philosophy changed again, moving away from the grand theories of the polis to the more intimate question of how the individual can achieve quiet happiness, ataraxia, in a vast, unpredictable world. Epicureanism. Epicurus taught that the highest good was the quiet, gentle pursuit of pleasure, defined as the absence of pain and fear. He and his followers lived in a quiet garden outside Athens. The sound of their school was the soft munch of simple food and the quiet discussion among friends, rejecting the chaos of the public sphere. They believed in a gentle materialism and taught that death was simply the end of sensation, removing the ultimate source of fear. Stoicism. The Stoics, founded by Zeno of Citium, taught that virtue was the only true good, and happiness came from living in accordance with nature. The key was to control one's own perception and reaction, not the external world. The sound of the Stoic is silent, inner monologue, the constant, quiet self-rehearsal of logic to maintain tranquility, accepting what cannot be changed. This philosophy of quiet, rational endurance would profoundly influence Roman governance and Western ethics. These Hellenistic schools were philosophies of self-management, designed to bring inner stillness to a world that was too big and chaotic to control. The legacy of the philosophers under the olive trees is the profound, quiet realization that questioning is the highest human virtue. They gave us the fundamental tools of Western civilization. Socrates gave us the method of critical self-examination. Plato gave us the idea of transcendence and idealism. Aristotle gave us the method of empirical observation and logic. These ideas were not imposed by force or decreed by kings. They were developed in quiet walks, rigorous debates, and silent contemplation, the sound of human reason unfolding itself. The philosophical schools eventually closed. The olive trees grew old, and the Greek world was absorbed by Rome. Yet, the path of thought remained. The questions asked in those quiet groves, what is good? What is real? How should we live? Did not vanish. They were preserved, translated, and built upon, becoming the foundation for religious theology, modern science, and the entire structure of Western education. As the final images of the Athenian quietude drift over you, let the sounds of the past settle, the soft scuff of sandals on the parapatos, the gentle rustle of dry leaves, and the profound, cleansing silence that follows a perfect, unanswerable question. You are sheltered in the long enduring shadow of the greatest thoughts ever conceived. Resting in the quiet cradle of human reason, the long shadow of the West and East, settle now, and let the sounds of philosophical debate in the sun-drenched Mediterranean fade. We are expanding our scope to encompass the entire breadth of the known ancient world, focusing on the greatest artery of exchange in human history, the Silk Road. The time frame is vast, stretching from roughly 200 BCE to 1400 CE, though we focus on its golden age, when the great empires Han China and Imperial Rome anchored its ends. The Silk Road was not a single, paved road, but a complex, shifting network of trade routes, thousands of miles of pathways linking Asia to the Mediterranean. It stretched from the eastern cities of Chang'an, Xi'an, and Luoyang, across the formidable Pamir Mountains, through the desolate Taklamakan Desert, and westward through Persia, reaching the ports of Tyre and Antioch. The defining sound of this chapter is the soft, rhythmic thud of camel hooves on the dry earth, a sound that, repeated across the centuries and the vast distance, embodies the slow, quiet persistence of human connection. The great mystery of the Silk Road is its quiet power. It was a path built not by emperors or armies, but by the relentless quiet pursuit of profit and curiosity. It was an axis of exchange so profound that it transferred not just goods, but entire religions, technologies, and tragically, diseases, shaping the course of human history in silence. To understand the Silk Road is to understand its geography and its primary engine, the Bactrian camel. The central, most challenging section of the road lay across the vast, terrifying Taklamakan Desert, the Sea of Death, or once you go in, you never come out. The path skirted the northern and southern edges of this endless sand ocean, following oases fed by the melting snows of the surrounding mountains. Imagine the caravan. It is not a rush. Movement is defined by the slow, deliberate, rocking gait of the two-humped Bactrian camel, the sound of the camel, the rhythmic, muffled thud of its broad flat pads on the sand, and the constant, gentle jingle of the small bronze bells tied to its harness, musical counterpoint to the silence of the desert. The pace. A camel caravan moves at a relentless, average pace of roughly 2 miles per hour. A journey from Chang'an to Antioch took a minimum of 1 year, often more. This forced slowness shaped the entire trade mechanism. Goods were rarely carried the entire distance by one person. They were passed from trader to trader, from oasis to oasis, adding a markup at each stage, a slow, quiet relay race of commerce. The environment, demanded humility and patience. The quiet, focused endurance required to navigate the passes of the Pamirs, the roof of the world, or to survive the sandstorms of the Taklamakan, instilled a deep respect for the unforgiving landscape. The sound of the desert is the low whine of the wind moving across the dunes, threatening to bury the path entirely. The product that gave the road its name, silk, was the ultimate silent luxury. Its secret, protected fiercely by the Chinese for centuries, was the key to their wealth and power. Silk is made from the continuous thread produced by the silkworm, Bombyx mori. The knowledge required to cultivate the worms, sericulture, process the cocoons, and weave the shimmering, light fabric was a tightly held state secret. Imagine the Chinese workshops, the delicate, quiet process of reeling the fine filament from the cocoons in hot water, and the rhythmic, soft shush and clack of the large wooden looms as the luxurious fabric was woven. The value. In Rome, silk was valued ounce for ounce with gold. Its worth lay not just in its beauty, but in its impossibility. It seemed to be spun from light and air. The gold and silver of the Roman Empire flowed eastward, draining the Mediterranean economies in a continuous quiet stream, all in exchange for this soft, shimmering fabric. The road carried more than just silk. It was a path for quiet exchange of essential technologies, paper making from China, glass making from the West, and new methods of gold and silver working from Central Asia. These technological transfers were often quiet, accidental, and far more revolutionary than the silk itself. The rhythm of the Silk Road was defined by the caravanserai, the roadside inns or fortified stopping points built roughly a day's travel apart, 20 miles, after the immense, profound silence of the open road. The caravanserai was a sudden eruption of sound and activity. Imagine arriving at a serai at dusk. The sounds are layered and specific. The loud, guttural groan and sigh of the camels as they are unloaded and finally allowed to rest. The low, polyglot murmur of traders speaking a dozen different languages, Chinese, Sogdian, Persian, Greek, all trying to haggle and communicate through gesture and trade languages. Steady ring of the blacksmith's hammer repairing broken wheels or camel shoes, the smell of wood smoke, and simple cooking after days of dry rations. Sarai was a place of profound, quiet exchange of information. It was here that traders learned about prices in Parthia, political troubles in the Kushan Empire, and bandit activity in the Fergana Valley. News traveled slowly, haphazardly, and often inaccurately, but it was the invisible lubricant that kept the vast trade network operating. It was also here that culture was exchanged. Stories, jokes, philosophies, and cooking techniques were passed around the nightly fire, quietly reshaping the local culture of the oasis town and the beliefs of the travelers. Silk Road was the single most important path for the silent transfer of religion and philosophy across the ancient world. The traders, spending years away from home and facing constant danger, carried their beliefs with them for comfort and community. The quiet need for meaning often outpaced the hunger for profit. Buddhism, originating in India. Buddhism was the first major religion to utilize the Silk Road. It traveled slowly eastward, carried by monks and traders, finding fertile ground in the oasis towns and eventually reaching deep into China. The sound of Buddhism is the soft, repetitive chanting of mantras echoing through the quiet mountain caves and temples carved into the cliffs like those at Dunhuang. Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism, Persian and Central Asian religions, with their focus on light versus darkness, traveled westward, influencing early Christianity and philosophy. Christianity and Islam. In the later periods, Christianity, Nestorianism, and, most profoundly, Islam moved rapidly eastward, finding new communities and establishing trade networks that spanned continents. This movement of faith was often quiet and nonviolent. It was a subtle, patient process of cultural permeation, as local beliefs blended with the new concepts. The greatest monuments along the Silk Road are not forts, but the massive painted Buddha statues and the simple, quiet stupas and mosques, all standing as silent evidence of the journey of faith. Same network that allowed the quiet exchange of silk and salvation also served as the most efficient highway for disease. The Silk Road connected the rodent populations of the Central Asian steppes, natural reservoir for Yersinia pestis, with the dense urban populations of the Mediterranean and China. The caravan, moving slowly but continuously, was the perfect mechanism for spreading the flea-borne plague. The sound of disease, the sound associated with this, is the sudden, terrible silence of an abandoned sarai or a coastal city. The quiet cough of the infected, and the immediate, profound cessation of all commerce as the route closed down in fear. Stoicism. The Stoics, founded by Zeno of Citium, taught that virtue was the only true good, and happiness came from living in accordance with nature. The key was to control one's own perception and reaction, not the external world. The sound of the Stoic is silent, inner monologue, the constant, quiet self-rehearsal of logic to maintain tranquility, accepting what cannot be changed. This philosophy of quiet, rational endurance would profoundly influence Roman governance and Western ethics. These Hellenistic schools were philosophies of self-management, designed to bring inner stillness to a world that was too big and chaotic to control. The legacy of the philosophers under the olive trees is the profound, quiet realization that questioning is the highest human virtue. They gave us the fundamental tools of Western civilization. Socrates gave us the method of critical self-examination. Plato gave us the idea of transcendence and idealism. Aristotle gave us the method of empirical observation and logic. These ideas were not imposed by force or decreed by kings. They were developed in quiet walks, rigorous debates, and silent contemplation, the sound of human reason unfolding itself. The philosophical schools eventually closed. The olive trees grew old, and the Greek world was absorbed by Rome. Yet, the path of thought remained. The questions asked in those quiet groves, what is good? What is real? How should we live? Did not vanish. They were preserved, translated, and built upon, becoming the foundation for religious theology, modern science, and the entire structure of Western education. As the final images of the Athenian quietude drift over you, let the sounds of the past settle, the soft scuff of sandals on the parapatos, the gentle rustle of dry leaves, and the profound, cleansing silence that follows a perfect, unanswerable question. You are sheltered in the long enduring shadow of the greatest thoughts ever conceived. Resting in the quiet cradle of human reason, the long shadow of the West and East, settle now, and let the sounds of philosophical debate in the sun-drenched Mediterranean fade. We are expanding our scope to encompass the entire breadth of the known ancient world, focusing on the greatest artery of exchange in human history, the Silk Road. The time frame is vast, stretching from roughly 200 BCE to 1400 CE, though we focus on its golden age, when the great empires Han, China, and Imperial Rome anchored its ends. The Silk Road was not a single, paved road, but a complex, shifting network of trade routes, thousands of miles of pathways linking Asia to the Mediterranean. It stretched from the eastern cities of Chang'an, Xi'an, and Luoyang, across the formidable Pamir Mountains, through the desolate Taklamakan Desert, and westward through Persia, reaching the ports of Tyre and Antioch. The defining sound of this chapter is the soft, rhythmic thud of camel hooves on the dry earth, a sound that, repeated across the centuries and the vast distance, embodies the slow, quiet persistence of human connection. The great mystery of the Silk Road is its quiet power. It was a path built not by emperors or armies, but by the relentless quiet pursuit of profit and curiosity. It was an axis of exchange so profound that it transferred not just goods, but entire religions, technologies, and tragically, diseases, shaping the course of human history in silence. To understand the Silk Road is to understand its geography and its primary engine, the Bactrian camel. The central, most challenging section of the road lay across the vast, terrifying Taklamakan Desert, the Sea of Death, or once you go in, you never come out. The path skirted the northern and southern edges of this endless sand ocean, following oases fed by the melting snows of the surrounding mountains. Imagine the caravan. It is not a rush. Movement is defined by the slow, deliberate, rocking gait of the two-humped Bactrian camel, the sound of the camel, the rhythmic, muffled thud of its broad flat pads on the sand, and the constant, gentle jingle of the small bronze bells tied to its harness, musical counterpoint to the silence of the desert. The pace. A camel caravan moves at a relentless, average pace of roughly 2 miles per hour. A journey from Chang'an to Antioch took a minimum of 1 year, often more. This forced slowness shaped the entire trade mechanism. Goods were rarely carried the entire distance by one person. They were passed from trader to trader, from oasis to oasis, adding a markup at each stage, a slow, quiet relay race of commerce. The environment demanded humility and patience. The quiet, focused endurance required to navigate the passes of the Pamirs, the roof of the world, or to survive the sandstorms of the Taklamakan, instilled a deep respect for the unforgiving landscape. The sound of the desert is the low whine of the wind moving across the dunes, threatening to bury the path entirely. The product that gave the road its name, silk, was the ultimate silent luxury. Its secret, protected fiercely by the Chinese for centuries, was the key to their wealth and power. Silk is made from the continuous thread produced by the silkworm, Bombyx mori. The knowledge required to cultivate the worms, sericulture, process the cocoons, and weave the shimmering, light fabric was a tightly held state secret. Imagine the Chinese workshops, the delicate, quiet process of reeling the fine filament from the cocoons in hot water, and the rhythmic, soft shush and clack of the large wooden looms as the luxurious fabric was woven. The value. In Rome, silk was valued ounce for ounce with gold. Its worth lay not just in its beauty, but in its impossibility. It seemed to be spun from light and air. The gold and silver of the Roman Empire flowed eastward, draining the Mediterranean economies in a continuous quiet stream, all in exchange for this soft, shimmering fabric. The road carried more than just silk. It was a path for quiet exchange of essential technologies, paper making from China, glass making from the West, and new methods of gold and silver working from Central Asia. These technological transfers were often quiet, accidental, and far more revolutionary than the silk itself. The rhythm of the Silk Road was defined by the caravanserai, the roadside inns or fortified stopping points built roughly a day's travel apart, 20 miles, after the immense, profound silence of the open road. The caravanserai was a sudden eruption of sound and activity. Imagine arriving at a serai at dusk. The sounds are layered and specific. The loud, guttural groan and sigh of the camels as they are unloaded and finally allowed to rest. The low, polyglot murmur of traders speaking a dozen different languages, Chinese, Sogdian, Persian, Greek, all trying to haggle and communicate through gesture and trade languages. Steady ring of the blacksmith's hammer repairing broken wheels or camel shoes, the smell of wood smoke, and simple cooking after days of dry rations. Sarai was a place of profound, quiet exchange of information. It was here that traders learned about prices in Parthia, political troubles in the Kushan Empire, and bandit activity in the Fergana Valley. News traveled slowly, haphazardly, and often inaccurately, but it was the invisible lubricant that kept the vast trade network operating. It was also here that culture was exchanged. Stories, jokes, philosophies, and cooking techniques were passed around the nightly fire, quietly reshaping the local culture of the oasis town and the beliefs of the travelers. Silk Road was the single most important path for the silent transfer of religion and philosophy across the ancient world. The traders, spending years away from home and facing constant danger, carried their beliefs with them for comfort and community. The quiet need for meaning often outpaced the hunger for profit. Buddhism, originating in India. Buddhism was the first major religion to utilize the Silk Road. It traveled slowly eastward, carried by monks and traders, finding fertile ground in the oasis towns and eventually reaching deep into China. The sound of Buddhism is the soft, repetitive chanting of mantras echoing through the quiet mountain caves and temples carved into the cliffs like those at Dunhuang. Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism, Persian and Central Asian religions, with their focus on light versus darkness, traveled westward, influencing early Christianity and philosophy. Christianity and Islam. In the later periods, Christianity, Nestorianism, and, most profoundly, Islam moved rapidly eastward, finding new communities and establishing trade networks that spanned continents. This movement of faith was often quiet and nonviolent. It was a subtle, patient process of cultural permeation, as local beliefs blended with the new concepts. The greatest monuments along the Silk Road are not forts, but the massive painted Buddha statues and the simple, quiet stupas and mosques, all standing as silent evidence of the journey of faith. Same network that allowed the quiet exchange of silk and salvation also served as the most efficient highway for disease. The Silk Road connected the rodent populations of the Central Asian steppes, natural reservoir for Yersinia pestis, with the dense urban populations of the Mediterranean and China. The caravan, moving slowly but continuously, was the perfect mechanism for spreading the flea-borne plague, the sound of disease. The sound associated with this is the sudden, terrible silence of an abandoned sarai or a coastal city, the quiet cough of the infected, and the immediate, profound cessation of all commerce as the route closed down in fear. The most catastrophic example is the Black Death, 14th century CE, which traveled the Silk Road from Central Asia to Europe. This silent, invisible enemy did more to reshape the late medieval world than any emperor or army. The very connection that created the wealth became the vehicle for mass destruction. The Silk Road's true quiet power was its ability to connect worlds. For both good and existential threat, the Silk Road did not end in a single event, but in a slow, quiet, economic transition around the 5th-10th century CE. The two main factors that contributed to its decline were political fragmentation, the collapse of the stable anchor empires, the Mongols, while briefly unifying, were too unstable, and the Ming dynasty focused inward, led to increasing banditry and insecurity, raising the cost and risk of overland trade. The rise of the sea lanes, new technology in shipbuilding and navigation, allowed merchants to bypass the dangerous, expensive, and slow overland route. The massive, efficient maritime trade routes, the spice routes, opened up, making the journey by sea cheaper, safer, and faster. The defining sound of the change is the quiet return of the desert's original silence. The rhythmic thud of the camel caravan became less frequent, the lights in the sarai grew dimmer, and the paths slowly succumbed to the shifting sand. The great network did not vanish, but its focus shifted. The quiet, arduous work of the overland trader gave way to the faster, louder, but ultimately more efficient business of the sailing ship. The Silk Road became a memory of connection, a ghost highway that forever imprinted the cultures it linked. As the final images of the endless caravan drift Feel the dry heat of the sun on your face and the gentle, persistent rock of the camel beneath you. Hear the soft, eternal jingle of the camel bells fading into the vast, dry distance. You are traveling in the quiet pursuit of connection, carrying not just silk, but the profound, enduring ideas that shape the world.